It started the day Ed Harlan came out of the woods alone. We all knew Ed and his buddies used to hunt out of season, but it kept the deer population under control, so no one in our small town cared to report him over it. They were subtle about it too. Always went out real early in the morning and never came out until after dark. Out of sight, out of mind. So when Ed came walking down Main Street in broad daylight, still dressed in his hunting gear with his rifle over his shoulder, everyone stopped and stared. He didn't say a word to anyone. He just walked right into Abe Halsey's little juke joint on the corner of Washington and Main, set his rifle down on the bar, and ordered a bottle of whiskey. Abe was nervous, but he never was one to refuse a customer. Not long after, our town's sheriff calmly pulled up a stool next to him and asked if he was okay. But Ed wasn't okay. In fact, Ed was never okay again. He had big dark circles around his eyes, and he was pale too, like he hadn't eaten in days. His hands shook as he brought the bottle to his lips, the fingers stained with dark patches of dried blood. "Where are your buddies, Ed?" the sheriff asked. Ed leaned over to him, and with the sour stench of whiskey on his breath, he whispered, "The woods took 'em." Ed was arrested, suspected of murdering his hunting buddies during some kind of psychotic break. Word was, the sheriff wasn't expecting to find any bodies, not out in the vast pine-barren wilderness where bears and coyotes would pick their bones clean before the week's end. The scandal rocked our one-stop light Arkansas town. One road in, one road out. The rest was just trees. Worst it ever got around there was the occasional DUI or domestic dispute. But there we were, a straight-up triple homicide, and folks were justifiably horrified by it. Ed was normally so warm and friendly too. Sure, he flouted the odd hunting restriction, but he was a good man, a family man. How he could do such an awful thing to his own friends, it had to be a terrible misunderstanding or accident, maybe even some kind of animal attack. But people in small towns talk, and rarely is their gossip good-natured. There were whispers of Ed's drinking habits, of the temper he hid behind his kindly smile. Those woods could be a dark place sometimes. Maybe that darkness just got the better of him one day. The next day, the sheriff went out into the woods with a handful of deputies and some cadaver dogs, hoping to find some clue to the fate of the missing hunters. 3 trucks full of men with bloodhounds, shotguns, and enough dip to keep them wired for days set off at dawn, intending to make the most of the daylight. They were waved off from Main Street like heroes. The widows wanted their men back, even if it was just to put them to rest. A few hours later, I was working the lunch rush at a local diner when I heard screeching tires from the street outside. The search party had returned early and with bad news. The bodies had not been found. The sheriff batted away questions from journalists and anxious townsfolk alike, explaining that he'd be in touch with his superiors over at the county and that they'd send additional deputies down to provide assistance. He was trying to act calm, but we could see it in his face. He was scared. We were told to go about our business as usual, but I could see the way some of the search party was acting. They'd seen something out there, in the woods, and it terrified them. When I asked my dad if we should leave town until things blew over, he scoffed at the idea. It was my final year of high school, he said, one of the most important of my education. Whatever happened out in the woods was a terrible tragedy, but we couldn't just pack up and leave. People had bills to pay, families to provide for. Mom agreed, saying those that had left town already were overreacting. Besides, there was a suspect in custody. It's not like anyone was still out there, creeping among the trees and waiting to claim another victim. I fell asleep that night with her reassurances in my ear. Mom was always so rational, so comforting, in the way that only moms seem to be. As I dozed off, I told myself that she was right, that things would get back to normal soon enough. But they didn't. They got much, much worse. The next morning, Bill Howard, whose pig farm was just a few miles down the road, was spotted driving his old pickup into town. He was a doer, a solitary man who rarely found time for social calls. He was only ever spotted during his monthly trips to the town's general store to pick up groceries. So naturally, people took notice when he brought his truck to a stop outside of the sheriff's office. They said he looked distraught, but it took until noon for the news to reach us. Something had slaughtered his hogs, every single one of them. It was no animal attack either. There was no missing flesh or teeth marks on any of the corpses. Instead, each and every pig's head had been torn from their bodies before being stacked into a pile just outside their pens. A pile that was almost twice as tall as Bill Howard. On top of that, it all happened while Bill was asleep. Normally, so much as a raccoon went near those pig pens at night, his hogs would start squealing something fierce and wake him up. But old Bill didn't hear a thing. Not so much as a whimper. Just wakes up one morning to find all his hogs had had their heads torn off. And I mean torn off, not cut. When the news about Bill Howard's hogs got around, even more people started to leave town. Not a whole lot, but you started to notice the odd family loading suitcases into the trunks of their cars, telling the kids that they're going on an impromptu vacation. Not that you could blame them. This feeling of unease seemed to hang over the community, a sense that things could only get worse before they got better. Dad just rolled his eyes and shook his head at them, but I remember my mom had this look about her, one I'd seen on the faces of more and more of friends and neighbors. "Are you kidding me, Jackie? You too with this crap now?" That night, my parents were still arguing as I climbed into bed, but beneath that anger, there was something deeper at work. Fear. But it wasn't until the incident at the church that people started to get really frightened. Pastor Mike had been the town's spiritual leader for almost 3 decades. He was a pillar of the community, present at almost all our family gatherings, both celebratory and sorrowful. He'd preached the Bible to 3 generations of our sleepy little town and knew us all by our virtues. But he also knew us by our sins. He knew every adulterer, every batterer, every problem gambler. Pastor Mike held all our darkest secrets right in the palm of his hand. Yet he'd never seen anything that shook his faith quite as hard as what he saw that morning when he walked into church. Mike walked into the main hall to find that the large white cross which stood at the head of the congregation had been utterly desecrated. It was almost completely wrapped in a web of dried roots, scratched to oblivion, and the face of Christ had been completely chipped away. In its place was a small wad of clay that had strange eldritch symbols carved into the soft brown surface. Tangled in the roots that clung to the cross were a collection of small bones, yet it was unclear which animal they had come from. He and some of his congregation spent the remainder of the day cleaning up and praying aloud together in an attempt to sanctify the place. They sang hymns, taking turns to speak passionately about the cleaning power of Christ, while a new cross was erected in place of the old one. It was an attempt to keep the townsfolk calm, but it was far too late for that, and the exodus had begun in earnest. Only this time it wasn't just trunks being loaded with suitcases full of summer clothes. It was windows being boarded up. It was frightened housewives bulk buying canned goods from the already half-depleted grocery stores. It was "Looters will be shot" signs being hammered into front lawns. All in all, about a third of the town's population just packed up and left. "Bunch of superstitious rubes," my dad sneered. "Whoever messed with the church is just some punk with an overactive imagination. While this town still has a sheriff and this house still has a shotgun in it, we're not going anywhere." So, we didn't. And we paid for it. A few days later, my parents and I were sat at our kitchen table having dinner together. The mood in the house had become increasingly tense as the days passed. Mom and Dad had been arguing a lot more, so neither of them talked as I pushed the last of my green beans around the plate. It was a perfect silence, one that made the sound of the gunshot from our neighbor's yard all the more dreadful. "Upstairs, everyone now!" my dad yelled, following us up to take a small .38 revolver from a Digilock safe. "Steve, don't!" Mom begged him not to go back downstairs, but he did. He said he had to. They were some of the most terrifying few minutes of my life, hiding up in a locked bedroom, not knowing if my dad was ever going to come back. It took a full 15 minutes or so before we finally got the all clear, and I've never been so relieved to hear his voice. We went downstairs to see my dad talking with one of the neighbors. The neighbor had tears in his eyes as he told us how their toddler had been playing with their 4-year-old Labrador in the backyard when the dog began to growl. He watched in absolute horror as the thing began to twitch and shake, making sounds they'd never heard before, noises no dog should ever make. My neighbor had already grabbed his shotgun by the time the dog had lunged for his kid, and that they'd cried something awful while they dug a grave for the thing in the backyard. But when he spoke next, the look of sadness left his eyes and was replaced by something different. In a low voice, he told us he was no veterinarian, but he knew what the insides of an animal were supposed to look like. He cut that old Labrador almost in two with 2 blasts of his buckshot, but when he saw what was inside of it, it looked all wrong. It looked sick. Dad went over to help bury the dog. We figured he'd be gone for a while, but he returned in minutes. "The neighbors are staying here tonight," he said. Okay. Mom's nerves were fried at this point, but she kept a brave face. "But what happened over there? Did you help bury the dog?" "Threw a tarp over it. No one's touching that thing. We're disinfecting the whole lot, and we're calling the sheriff." As he spoke, I realized I'd never seen that kind of look on my dad's face. For the first time in my life, I actually saw him afraid. "Alex," he said after turning to me, "go help Mr. and Mrs. Perry with their bags." "Bags?" Mom asked. "Are we leaving?" "Maybe I need to talk to Mr. Perry first, but I'm coming around to the idea." "Oh, thank God." As I began to make my way out front to help the neighbors with their things, Dad stopped me. "I mean it, boy. Don't go near that tarp in their backyard." "What the hell happened, Dad? What did you see?" I asked him. I don't know," he said, shaking his head. "It was a real mess out there, but, you know, when there's an earthquake or a hurricane or something, it's the animals that are first to feel it. You ever hear that?" "Yeah, I heard that," I replied. "Look outside. Sun's setting. Birds should be chirping their feathery little butts off, but listen. Just listen to that." It was deathly quiet. I haven't heard a note of birdsong all goddamn day. "What are you saying, Dad?" I asked. "I'm saying," he sighed. "I'm saying pack a bag, just in case." As the sun began to dip below the horizon, we helped the neighbors get settled into our spare bedroom. Kate and David had only moved into the neighborhood around 6 months prior, along with their 3-year-old daughter. After putting their kid to bed, Mom poured them glass after glass of white wine, soothing their nerves after such a harrowing ordeal. But the conversation didn't remain trivial. Talk soon turned to what had been happening in town over the past few weeks. "We moved out here because we heard it was quiet," Kate said. "If you can believe that. The murders out in the woods didn't bother us too much. I know that sounds kind of cynical. It's just we used to live in Little Rock," David explained. "But the whole thing with the pig farm and what happened over at the church, who the hell would do something like that? I mean, we thought it was just all punks messing around with Farmer Howard at first. Went a little too far, sure, killing all those hogs. But then the church," my mom said, "seems almost satanic." "David, don't go saying those things," Kate gently scolded her husband, a sliver of fear in her voice. "I know, I'm sorry. Maybe this is a little melodramatic," he replied. "But somehow, the murders, the hogs, the church, it all seems somehow connected." Mom finished. Suddenly in walked my dad, cell phone in hand. "All right, just got off the phone with the sheriff. Told him about your dog," he said, a somber tone to his voice. "And?" "Said he'd stop by in the morning with the forest ranger to take care of it." "Did you ask him about leaving town, honey?" "About that," he began as we listened intently. "He said he didn't think it had come to that just yet. They're still waiting on those extra deputies to help out, but I asked him if he'd been in touch with any of the families that have already left. He was real cagey on it. When I pressed him, he said he might have missed a call or two from them, but I don't think he's heard back from any of them." As Mom tried to contact some of the families that had already left, our neighbor announced he was going to retrieve his shotgun from his abandoned home. "Disconnected? What in the world?" Mom looked confused. She held out her phone for us to see, but I could already hear the faint beeping of a dead number. Guys, you should come hear this," the neighbor called out anxiously from the open front door to our house. We got up from my seat, joining him at the open threshold, but as I did, I began hearing this low, scratchy, whining sound. My ears prick up, trying to work out just what the sound is and where it's coming from. Discordant, groaning, scraping sounds coming from the woods behind our houses. It was the sound of some ragged old bow being dragged across rusty, tuneless strings. It was the sound of a violin. "What in the world?" Get in the house," Dad murmured. "But Dad, get back in the goddamn house, Alex," he growled. "Right now." We were already filing back indoors by the time he had his revolver drawn, pointing it into the darkness as we headed back to safety. For hours and hours, the violin kept droning on. The mothers and children, myself included, made our way upstairs to try to get some rest, while the men stayed downstairs in the TV room, their firearms within arm's reach. But as much as we tried, sleep was almost impossible. No matter what, we could all still seem to hear that wretched screeching, echoing through the trees outside. Yet somehow, some way, I must have drifted off to sleep, because the next thing I remember was my dad shaking me awake. Alex, wake up!" Through tired, fuzzy eyes, I could see bright, red light spilling into the room. "Don't make a sound, but you gotta get up for me, buddy." I sat up with a jolt, throwing on my chucks before following Dad downstairs. "Where the hell is that red light coming from?" He thrust something at me before I could finish. It was the wooden bat I'd played Little League with. "Take this." But why?" I asked. His reply made my blood run cold. "Something's outside." According to Dad, he and Dave were still keeping watch when the sound of the violin finally stopped. But no sooner than it had, the entire house was bathed in that hideous red glow. That's when they'd heard it, shuffling around in the grass outside, and I heard it too. As the three of us stood there, silent as the grave, we could hear whatever it was out there creeping around the edge of the house. Slowly but surely, it lumbered its way around to the front yard. "Do we say something?" David frantically whispered. "No, stay quiet," Dad hissed in reply. With shaking hands, the men traced the movement of the thing outside with barrels of their weapons as it shuffled further and further towards the front door. Then we saw it. Through the frosted glass of a small panel window on the front door, we saw the shape of something hobble into view. "What the hell? Who is that?" I remember saying out loud. Dave? Dad hissed. Rack the shotgun. What? Rack the goddamn shotgun! Loud! The neighbor did so, the satisfying mechanical chick-chuck, like a roar in the horrid sanguine glow. We're locked and loaded in here, Dad barked, aiming his revolver at the doorframe. Now get off my property before somebody gets hurt. On the other side of the door, the shape appeared to cock its head. Alex, call the sheriff, Dad said, trying to sound as calm as possible. I pulled my phone out, hammering 911 into the touchscreen. The line was busy. I hung up and tried again. Still busy. Dad, I can't get through. Try mine, he said, tossing me the phone from his pocket. It's got his cell. I frantically searched the phone's contacts before finding the number, bringing the handset to my ear as it dialed. The number you have dialed is not in service. Please hang up. Damn it! My hushed curse was all the indication Dad needed. Just try it again, boy. Take your time. I did, but over the looping metallic tone, I heard something that made me about jump out of my skin. Smash. The shape outside was pounding on the door. Oh, God! Our neighbor whimpered, the shotgun trembling in his grip. You break in here and we will shoot you! Dad barked. Another smash against the door. Okay, David, Dad said, his voice trembling as he tried to remain composed. If they break in here, you shoot until they're not moving anymore, you got it? I got it! Smash! The sanguine glow outside seemed to grow in intensity for a moment, almost buzzing for a moment as the hammering reached its peak. The door was shaking with every impact now, like it might crumble away at any moment, and through the din, we could hear our neighbor's infant girl wailing in distress. Get the hell away from the door or we shoot! Dad barked as the shape on the other side hurled itself against the door. And suddenly, it stopped. The battering ceased as the red glow faded into darkness. We all stood there for a few moments in the pitch darkness, wondering if it was really over, the only sound being the wails of the baby upstairs. Where did it go? The neighbor finally whispered. I don't know, Dad replied. Should we check? No, we're not going out there, Dad said, lowering his weapon. Go see your kid. I'll keep watch down here with the boy. We watched as a very shaken David placed his shotgun on the TV room's coffee table before heading upstairs to console his crying child. Here, Dad said solemnly. Give me a hand with this couch. As we slid the large three-seater up against the front door, I asked my dad what he thought was going on. Look, I don't know exactly, but the cops are going to catch whoever's doing it. Everything is going to be fine, Alex. But for whatever reason, things aren't safe here right now. Then what are we going to do? I asked. We can't do anything without daylight, he replied. I could go talk to the sheriff in the morning, but something tells me a lot of other people are going to have the same idea. Want me to try his cell? Want me to try again? You could try. Don't expect an answer, though. I get the feeling we're not the only people to get a visit tonight. You should go upstairs and check on your mother. Maybe get some sleep if you can. But you'll be fine, Dad replied, finishing my sentence for me. I'll be fine. Now go check on your mother. Dad was right. Ours was not the only home that had been attacked that night, and the sheriff sent his deputies out to spread word of a town meeting. Within an hour, almost 100 frightened residents piled into the freshly pre-sanctified church, each desperate for answers. "What the hell tried to break into our home last night, Sheriff?" they cried out, as the sheriff addressed the crowd. "Where were you? We were calling all goddamn night." The sheriff simply stood there for a moment, soaking up the discontent. There was a deep exhaustion in his face, like the events of the past few weeks had somehow aged him by a decade. When he finally spoke, everyone fell silent. "I understand that you are all deeply concerned about the events of the past few weeks," he began. "But some of you here asked me questions I simply don't have the answers to. The only thing I can do is tell you what I know right now." The crowd was tense. You could hear a pin drop. "Almost a week ago now, I called the county for additional deputies to help us find the bodies of those missing hunters. The brass down there called me a couple days later, told me the deputies were on their way. Those deputies never arrived here in town, and the county hasn't been able to get any of them on the horn." There was nervous whispering among the assembly. "As for the families that left town in the days after the incidents, I haven't been able to get in touch with a single one. All their phones are dead, relatives ain't seen them. It's like they dropped off the face of the earth." The nervous whispering swelled into frightened murmurs. "I don't know who's been harassing this town. I don't know who attacked your homes last night, and I'm sorry I wasn't there to do more." His voice grew shaky as he spoke. "But what I can do is offer to head up a voluntary mass evacuation, starting first thing tomorrow morning." "We can't wait that long, Sheriff," someone yelled. Pockets of panic began to bubble among the townsfolk. "Now, people, we've lasted this long. We can last one more night. As far as I know, no one was hurt last night, were they?" He looked around the room expectantly. "See? It could be whatever's doing this is just trying to scare us. But at this point, quite frankly, I don't want to take that chance. So there'll be... Where are the McTells?" someone suddenly called out. The sheriff leaned over to a deputy who whispered something in his ear. "I believe the McTells left town a couple nights ago," he said. "Nah, Sheriff. I saw Ted in his driveway yesterday evening. They're here all right," another voice from the crowd announced. "Now, I called at their house this morning, I swear," said the baby-faced deputy, alarm creeping into his voice. "No one answered. I figured they just up and left." A group of men near the back stood up from their chairs and bolted out of the meeting hall's doors. The crowd got up and followed, listening to the sounds of manic revving and screeching tires as the men took off in pickups towards the McTell house. The house was just a few blocks away, so those capable of doing so pushed their way to the head of the crowd and began running in the direction of the fresh tire tracks. By the time we arrived, they had already kicked in the front door and were in the process of searching the house. A man walked out of the open front door so pale he almost looked green, before spewing up his breakfast onto the lawn. Another joined him, tears in his eyes as he tried to console his nauseous friend. I don't know what compelled me, but I started walking towards the house. Dad stopped me with a hand on my chest, silently shaking his head. He was looking at something in one of the top windows. You could tell it was a kid's room. The wallpaper was plastered with goofy-looking colorful cartoon characters, but on the window pane was the single bloody smear of a handprint. The McTells were dead. Ted lay dead in the doorway of his child's bedroom, his eyes a milky white. Inside, the arms of his dead wife were frozen around the body of their toddler. Both corpses showed signs of being eaten. No one wanted to wait any longer. The exodus had begun. Less than 2 hours later, trucks and cars laden with people and belongings lined up along Main Street in a kind of ragtag convoy of terrified townsfolk. At its head was the sheriff's Escalade, a huddle of armed men gathered around it. Eventually, the sheriff walked up and down the lines of cars, informing people that we'd be waiting a little longer to see if any others showed up. But it was already nearly late in the afternoon by that point. There were only a few hours of daylight left and people were starting to get nervous. Thankfully, we didn't have to wait much longer. The sheriff and his armed escorts let out whistles and shouts, piling into their vehicles and gunning their engines as the convoy finally began to get moving. I remember looking out of our car's window at the place I'd spent the first 19 years of my life in, wondering if I'd ever live to see it again. It was only during the drive out of town that we began to see just how different the woods were. They were hideously overgrown. The bark of the now mammoth trees cracked and warped from the strain of their rapid growth. A thick canopy of leaves and twisted branches had formed, plunging all that passed underneath them into shadow. Mom and I gawped out of the windows, awestruck by the terrifyingly unnatural flora, while Dad struggled to keep his eyes on the road. After a few more miles of smooth driving, the convoy began to slow to a crawl. Tension grew in the car as we waited to discover the cause. In large rough patches, the road had been torn up and rendered impassable. We had to get closer to see exactly why. Roots. Twisting woody tendrils had slowly erupted through the concrete. It was so bad in places that we were forced into a kind of slalom, the convoy swerving back and forth as it slowly edged around each hideous obstacle. But before long, the convoy yet again ground to a halt. "The hell is it this time? Come on, get moving!" Dad growled. But no one moved. Instead, people began to slowly get out of their cars. Reluctantly, we joined them, walking to the sides of the road to get a glimpse of the holdup. And what we saw terrified us. A long line of cars, just like ours, was lined up at something that, at first, made me think I was going crazy. It wasn't just roots that had eaten up the road. It was entire trees. Huge, fully grown trees had sprouted up through the tarmac, completely blocking our path. But that's not what scared me. That's not what had the other townsfolk crying and crossing themselves. It was the cars. They all belonged to people that had tried to leave town in the weeks before, and they were all abandoned. Jesus Christ. What happened to them? "Keep calm, people," the sheriff's voice echoed down the line. "We're gonna find ourselves a way through this." I watched one of the armed escorts produce a chainsaw from the back of his truck, the small, tinny engine growling as he started it up. Other men produced a variety of axes, knives, and hatchets, all before joining in the attempt to clear the road. No one asked how those trees could have sprouted up so quickly, or how a road that was clear just a few days ago was now completely impassable. Because the answer was that it was impossible. What was happening was impossible. "Oh my God, look!" Mom opened her mouth, pointing off towards the side of the road. She was looking at the base of one of the huge gnarled pine trees that towered above us. There, a black, festering fungus shimmered in the dim light. It was like nothing I had ever seen before, and it was moving. Consumed with morbid curiosity, my eyes were transfixed on the grotesque fungus. I didn't see when a man behind us hit the tarmac. There was a startled cry from the man's wife before bystanders rushed to his aid. As they kneeled around him, calling out his name, blood began to pool beneath his head. Something had fractured the back of his skull. Then, we saw them. They tore through the trees either side of us, ashen bodies with horns sprouting through matted hair, howling as they charged. Anyone with a firearm immediately opened up when the gray horde stampeding towards us. But they were fast, and they were many. In an instant, they were on us. Clawed limbs punctured organs, while teeth, black from rot, ripped away flesh from bone. People began to panic, jumping back into their cars trying to escape. But it was no good. The way back was blocked by other vehicles. Cars and trucks smashed into each other, crushing the bodies of the dead and dying alike. I distinctively remember the man with the chainsaw using it to slice into the torso of one of the beasts, a spray of red mist thrown up from the open wound. It was chaos. One of the things rushed Dad, screeching as it came. One shot from his .38 brought it down, but it kept crawling, cackling as it dragged itself towards us. I felt the baseball bat in my grip and stepped forward to finish it off. Over and over and over again, I brought the bat down on that thing's head with all my might, and by the time Dad stopped me, the fighting had ceased. My arms were covered with flecks of blood, the corpse of the thing beneath me twitching uncontrollably, but there would be no respite. A blood-curdling scream erupted from one among the survivors. In her hand, she held a set of the creature's horns, revealing them to be nothing more than a part of a primitive, woven headdress. And they didn't have clawed hands at all, simply sharpened sticks they'd tied to their forearms, and there was evidence the first of our number had fallen following the well-placed throw of a rock. People began to examine the bodies that hadn't been shot to pieces in the ambush, and as they did, made a horrifying discovery. These weren't a pack of monstrous creatures, somehow spawned by the woods. They were the people that had tried to leave town in the weeks prior. We lost a lot of people that night on both sides of the fighting, people I'd known all my life, but they were losses we didn't have time to dwell on. In a daze, we survivors got to work pushing aside the now ownerless cars before hauling off the dead and covering them as best we could. Then, bloodied and shaken, with the wounded lying in the back of the pickups, we turned around and headed back the way we came. Back into town. Back into the nightmare we'd been so desperate to escape. It was a ghost town, not a soul in sight. The desolation was chilling. That ragtag convoy of survivors tailed the sheriff's vehicle back to the sheriff's office, and no one dared to go anywhere alone. Those that didn't follow him inside waited in their cars as armed men stood guard around them. The sheriff unlocked the armory, telling deputies to hand out weapons and ammunition to those in need. The wounded were given aid, but more tears were shed when it found that many of them had succumbed to their injuries on the ride back. One by one, people began to notice that they had no signal on their cell phones. Panic rippled through us. Hope was wavering thin, but the sheriff was quick to reassure us. The department had a satellite phone in case of emergencies. Dad and I watched him make the call on a line that should have been crystal clear, but the distortion was so audibly bad that the sheriff had to repeat himself over and over, shouting into the handset to be heard. He told his superiors that they were cut off and that we needed air ambulance units. We hung on to every word, trying to gauge the response from the other side. It was no good. They didn't seem to grasp the severity of the situation. We needed the National Guard, but they'd take 24 hours to get to us. An air ambulance could arrive within an hour, but we needed a fleet of them. In the end, it seemed the best they could do was send 3 helicopters to pick up the survivors in 2 runs, one within a couple of hours, the next at dawn. It was decided. The women and children and wounded among us would be airlifted out first. Then, it would be up to the remainder to survive until morning. It was deathly quiet before the first helicopters arrived. In the late summer, Arkansas nights are invariably scored by a symphony of crickets, but not tonight. No one had seen or heard any wildlife for quite some time. We were huddled together, terrified and skittish, and we felt like prey. Dad and I argued in hushed voices about the prospect of me getting into the first flight of helicopters. I flat out refused. There was no way I could abandon him. I reminded him that I wasn't a child anymore. I expected him to seethe with anger that I'd talk back to him, but he didn't. "It's not that, Alex," he said, sadness creeping into his voice. I just can't watch you die here." The reality of the statement was horrifying. We were in a situation in which the last thing we might ever see would be the violent death of a loved one. The thought was unbearable, yet I still couldn't leave him. But I wouldn't get the chance to argue my point. Every conversation was silenced by the emergence of a man from the department's jail cells. Heads turned, jaws dropped. It was Ed Harlan. "Extenuating circumstances." The sheriff followed him out, uncuffing him in front of the nervous audience. "Good to see they let you out, Ed." A nervous voice spoke up from the darkness. Ed didn't say a thing in reply. He just nodded, heavy hunting boots thudding as he walked over to the open gun locker and took out a 12-gauge. We're sorry about your buddies," said another. He stopped racking shells into the shotgun for a moment and looked at the man, and we could all see that there was just nothing behind his eyes, like a piece of his soul had been left out in the woods the day he walked back into town. Without a word, he walked outside onto the concrete steps of the sheriff's department, stopping only to take a pack of cigarettes from a man's shirt pocket. There, he lit one up, starting out into the darkness, the loaded 12-gauge on his shoulder. We didn't hear a single word out of Ed's lips for the rest of the night, even when the first helicopters began to arrive. "They're here! Thank God they're here!" someone cried as the muffled thudding of distant rotor blades became audible. We rushed outside into the darkness, seeing the distant helicopter's lights blinking red and white in the night sky. One of the sheriff's deputies fired off a flare gun at the corner of a nearby intersection, illuminating the potential landing area with a warm orange glow. The chopper's downdraft kicked up dust and debris as they took turns landing at the intersection. We helped load up the wounded. Screaming can be heard over the cacophony of rotor blades. Men hugged their wives and children, some shedding tears, the uncertainty of their separation being too much to bear. No one knew when or if we'd see each other again. Then as quickly as they'd arrived, they were gone. We watched as they ferried the most vulnerable of us to safety, their blinking lights growing smaller and smaller until they disappeared entirely. There were just 11 of us then, and less than a dozen compared to the hundreds of people that had occupied the town just a week before. And as my eyes flickered between the fear-carved faces of those that remained, something terrible occurred to me. The attack on the convoy was preceded by the roaring of chainsaws and the clacking of axes splitting wood. The noise had drawn those twisted beings from the deepest, darkest reaches of the woods. If we summoned a pack of feral people with just the revving of a chainsaw, what in God's name would 3 helicopters attract? In the dead of the night, we got to work transforming the quaint county sheriff's office into a veritable fortress. We smashed up all the tables and chairs we could find, nailing wooden boards over exposed windows. The exterior of the building looked like a light show with torch beams crisscrossing each other as men armed with shotguns scanned the tree line. As I peered out of a crack in one of the boarded-up windows, I overheard the sheriff approaching my dad. "Can the boy shoot?" "He's fired at 22 over at his grandpa's house. Nothing bigger." "Every man here needs to be armed, Steve. I know that's not..." "No, I get it," my dad replied. "I give him my .38, but kicks like a mule." That was not the response I was expecting. "I'll have one of the deputies give him his 9mm. Should be enough for him to handle." I should have been proud that my dad thought that I was ready for that kind of responsibility, that in a time of crisis I was trusted enough to help. Yet it did nothing but terrify me. If I was being given a firearm to defend myself with, things were as bad as they could get. It was about then that I noticed one of the flashlights outside began to flicker. The man holding it shook the thing for a moment, smacking the end with an open palm, but it didn't help. It died in his hand as I watched his expression fade from confusion to panic. Another of the men went to his truck to grab a spare battery when his flashlight failed too. Then another man's light faded, then another's, until one by one, every flashlight outside the station flickered out. "Dad," I said quietly, "something's happening." No sooner than I'd spoken, the lights in the sheriff's department cut out too. We were plunged into complete darkness for a moment before several lighters sparked into life, bringing just a flicker of light back to us. "What the hell?" someone asked. "Power's out all over town. I don't know, just be ready," one of the deputies said nervously. But we could never have been ready for what came out of the woods that night. Never. From deep in the tree line, that same grim crimson glow began to emanate through the trees, bathing the entire area in a sickly, sanguine glimmer. That's when we saw them. 4 figures walking slowly towards us through the woods. Not one of them made a sound. They just stood at the edge of the tree line, 4 motionless silhouettes, watching us. It was Ed Harlan who first spoke. You, Henry?" One of the figures shifted a little. "Jesus Christ," someone muttered. "No wonder we couldn't find the bodies." The sheriff rushed outside, dragging Ed back into his office before he did anything reckless. He'd been locked up for just over a week for the murder of his buddies. Yet there they were. Only, they were different. Once Ed was back inside, we locked the door and piled furniture against it for what we assumed would be the inevitable assault. When it came, it was worse than I could have ever imagined. Since the only light was the faint red glow that seeped through the cracks in the boarded-up windows, the deputies rushed to retrieve some oil lanterns from the station's storage room. Once lit, they revealed something in a corner of the department's reception area, something that wasn't there before. It was a hole. Or to be more precise, one large hole in the floor surrounded by many smaller holes that appeared to have been freshly bored into the wood. "What the hell?" someone remarked, edging towards the deep, dark opening. "Hey, keep away from that thing," someone hissed. But that man didn't listen. Suddenly, what could be best described as a huge black-legged tick scuttled out from the cavity and across the floor with lightning speed. The curious man aimed his shotgun at the creature, but it was too fast. It leapt onto the top of the weapon, scuttled up the stamped steel, then lunged, plunged its mandibles into the soft flesh of his neck. He opened his mouth to scream, but all that came out was a wet gargle, and for a moment, we were mesmerized by the stomach-churning sight of the tick thing's blood sac, swelling and darkening as it filled with the dying man's blood. I don't know who fired the shot that turned the tick thing into a slurry of black gore. It didn't matter that its victim took a peppering to the face either. He was already dead. Another man fired a few shots down what we now realized was a tunnel. "Someone cover that thing over, for Christ's sakes," the sheriff cried. We flipped a table and used it to block off the tunnel's entrance, a temporary solution to a much greater problem. Hey, something's outside," someone barked. "One of the missing hunters?" another asked. "Nah, ain't like what attacked the cars either. This thing's fast. Real fast." "Jesus Christ," another yelped. "I saw it too. What in the name of God is that thing?" The next thing I know, the screech of heavy furniture raking against a hard floor echoed around the room. There were terrified screams as we prepared to face the terrible new threat, only to find it was Ed Harlan making the noise. He was removing the barricade and unlocking the front door. "Hey, Ed! What the hell do you think you're doing?" Ed remained silent. He just closed the door behind him and disappeared. "Goddamn coward!" We rushed to replace the barricade, fearing the thing outside might come crashing through the sudden weak spot in our defenses. But it didn't. Whatever was out there didn't even make an attempt. Ed's flight might just have been the distraction we needed, but our luck didn't last. Minutes later, something smashed into one of the boarded-up windows to the rear of the sheriff's office. One of the men struck the barrel of his shotgun through the newly smashed gap in the barricade, firing off a few shells before a howl of pain could be heard from outside. Then, a deep thumping sound on the roof of the office made us freeze. Something heavy, something huge, was moving around up there. I felt the goosebumps on my skin as a deep silence settled over us for the first few moments, waiting for the thing to move again. What came next was an explosion of masonry and wood splinters as the roof came crashing down around us. And even before the dust had cleared, we could all make out the huge bipedal beast that suddenly stood before us. It turned to me, black eyes looking out from grotesque avian features, and the screech that followed was so ear-splittingly loud that I thought my skull might split from the sheer force of it. I closed my eyes, dropping to my knees as the nightmarish images of rot and decay flashed behind my eyelids. Then, just as sudden as it occurred, I was free from the agony. When my vision fully returned, the first sight to greet me was that of the beast, splayed out on the floor, torn apart by shotgun blasts. Only whatever eldritch life force the beast possessed wasn't entirely extinguished. It began to twitch and fracture, splitting apart. Then we watched in utter horror as the huge avian beast's limbs took on a sentience of their own, sniffing the air before squirming hungrily towards us. Another burst of shotgun fire followed terrified screams from the traumatized survivors. Then the thing moved no more. A moment later, we heard yet another roar approaching the sheriff's office, only this one was much more welcome to our ears. It was the sound of a pickup truck tearing along Main Street and past the sheriff's department, crashing into the nearby field and towards the glowing red tree line. Music was blaring from the open windows, a tune that sounded vaguely familiar to me.
That's Ed Harlan's truck. Is he out of his goddamn mind?
Someone exclaimed. The pickup braked just before crashing into the trees. Ed Harlan got out, then pulled away a tarp covering the rear storage, revealing its cargo. Gas canisters, maybe 24 of them, were stuffed into the truck bed. One by one, Ed began unscrewing the caps before emptying the volatile contents into the tree line.
Jesus Christ, if he sets that fire before rescue arrives, the choppers won't be able to land for the smoke. Goddamn idiot.
One of the deputies barked. No one moved to stop him. We just watched as he repeated the process time and time again until we could smell the stench of gasoline on the breeze. It was the single longest night of my life. But death would be a small mercy compared to the fate of those that attacked us at the roadblock of twisted tree trunks. Yet just as the last dregs of hope were being burned up by the horror of what faced us, the thudding of distant rotor blades could suddenly be heard. They had finally come back for us. It was almost over. Weapons at the ready, we rushed out of the sheriff's office, the helicopter's spotlights lighting up the nearby intersection as they prepared to land. We could see things moving in the shadows all around us, hungry for one last chance to strike. Men were still firing at nightmarish shapes around us when the choppers touched down, still popping off shots as we piled into their cavernous bellies, traumatized and exhausted. In the distance, I watched Ed Harlan splashing the last of his gasoline amongst the trees as the same 4 figures reappeared next to him. Ed stopped, staring at them for a moment. Then, as the helicopter I was on took off and rose up into the night sky, the woods below me burst into flames. As a huge fireball rose up among the treetops, the flames spread with terrifying speed, engulfing Ed Harlan and his 4 missing hunting buddies. The conflagration swallowed up the dry foliage, spilling through the pines until it scorched and ignited some of the buildings on the edge of town. Tree after tree was consumed by the inferno, and as we watched them burn, I swear I could hear the woods scream. Tears streaked my solemn stare as I watched everything I've ever known turn to ashes before my eyes. And it was only then that I realized what song was blaring from the stereo system of Ed's battered old pickup truck. It was an old Hank Williams tune. I'll gas up my hot rod stoker. We'll get hotter than a poker. You'll be broke, but I'll be broker. Tonight we're setting the woods on fire. United States Department of Defense. Classified document. Access restricted to DV security clearance. Distribution will result in arrest and prosecution under Section 2B of the United States Espionage Act, 1917. The following is a copy of a handwritten letter seized from Operator 734-812, call sign, Horace. March 11th, 2017. Hi, Mom. I'm so sorry I haven't wrote to you in a while, but this new unit doesn't allow outside communication. They don't know I'm writing this, so please keep it to yourself, and don't show or tell anyone, not even Dad or Steph. I miss you all so much, but please, you have to keep the secret. Honestly, I think I made a huge mistake in volunteering. I knew SEALs were going to be hardcore, but this new unit is on another level. I signed up to the military to serve our country and make Dad proud. I thought volunteering would be doing the right thing, but the stuff they make us do is just wrong. I don't know who the hell I'm working for anymore. I don't even think they're subject to any kind of federal oversight. And then the kind of crap they got us dealing with? I've never been so scared in my whole life. It makes Syria seem like summer camp. First operation was last night, and I feel sick to my stomach just thinking about it. We were attached to a section of the CIRG, CIRG, or the Critical Incident Response Group. They're the FBI's counterterrorism guys. Think SWAT, but with more expensive toys. But instead of going in with our own uniforms and patches, we were given a bunch of their stuff to wear. Then told to say that we were part of Counter IED team out of San Francisco. They were so nice to us, Mom. Treated us like their brothers, and what we did to them was just... it was evil. They kind of figured something was off when they saw we had a helmet and weapon cameras attached to our gear. They had all the recording equipment taken away from them prior to the operation, but like many of us, they didn't openly question it. Ours not to reason why, ours but to do and die, one of them said. Told us it was from a poem, but I don't know which one. The CIRG guys thought that we were there to handle any explosive materials found on site, but in reality, our orders were to observe and contain. I didn't really know what this meant at first. The only other thing we were told is that anyone declared hostile was to be immediately eliminated. I thought that might mean any bad guys we found at the scene, but Mom, we were the bad guys. I don't know exactly where the op took place. All I know is that we flew out of SeaTac up in Washington, then landed near some old cabin in the sticks. The CIRG team was waiting for us there, and not long after we landed, we moved on the cabin. The cordon around it was almost half a mile in every direction, and I figured this was to fool the CIRG guys into thinking there were some legit explosives on site. But now I know that cordon was there for a damn good reason. They didn't want anyone else to get infected by what was inside. I don't know exactly how they guaranteed we wouldn't be infected. I think there was something inside our helmet lining that kept it out, but whatever it was, the counterterrorism guys didn't have it, and I know that it was on purpose. We figured almost right away that no one was living there. There were no signs of habitation whatsoever, but they still had us clearing the place like there could be bad guys around every corner. We were ordered to take it nice and slow, like old school, methodical room clearing, kind of like back in SEAL training. But that wasn't because Command wanted to minimize casualties. They wanted the CIRG guys in the cabin for as long as it took for it to infect one of them. At first, the place looked like any other cabin in the woods. Open plan stove and cooking area, bunks in one room, butcher's table and meat grinder in another. All looked totally normal. But then it came to clearing the root cellar, and that's when things got real scary. Whoever dug the place out had it pretty spacious, but there were no storage spaces whatsoever. Everything was bare except for a few supports to keep it from collapsing, everything except the cellar floor. Someone had laid down some partial wooden flooring in the shape of a big triangle. It was thick too, jammed down into the dirt so tight that it looked like someone had dug it out instead of fixing it into the earth somehow. Only when we got closer did we start to see all the symbols on it. It was a real piece of work, like someone must have spent days, maybe even weeks, carving all that stuff into it. I'd never seen anything like it before, not even in the language school we got sent to for about a month to be able to recognize Arabic and Cyrillic and all those other kinds of letters. One of the Sir guys said it looked like something a crazy person would make. No rhyme or reason to it at all. But to me, it looked deliberate, very deliberate, like someone had taken painstaking steps to ensure each one was perfect. Then, for the first time since we landed, me and the other operator heard the voice of our commanding officer speaking into our earpieces. He told us to focus our weapon cams on the triangle and to not move them away until we were told. We had to stand there for a good few minutes before we got new orders to back into the corners of the cellar, facing the Surg guys. They, on the other hand, were told to just stand by to await further orders. We could hear everything they could, but they couldn't hear everything we could. A few minutes went by and the Surg guys are just milling around, shooting the breeze, wondering out loud how long they'd have to stay down in that cold, damp cellar before the op came to a close. Guys like us are used to waiting, Mom. You know that. All Dad ever talks about when he brings up the golf is the whole hurry up and wait thing. Wait orders are basically no orders, and that's when that killer boredom sets in. But me and the other operator were told to observe and not take our helmet cams off the Surg guys. I had a feeling something was going to happen with them, I just didn't know what. But when it did finally happen, I swear to Jesus, Mom, I've never seen anything so terrifying in my entire life. All the Surg guys were talking among themselves, discussing family stuff, using each other's kids' names and stuff. And then all of a sudden, one of them stopped talking while in the middle of a sentence, and we all knew something was wrong. The guy was all talkative and animated 1 second, and then the next, he was silent. He'd been saying something about how one of his kids was always unscrewing nuts and bolts around the house, how he was shaping up to be a regular handyman. He was miming the motion of little hands picking at a bolt, trying to unscrew it, then he suddenly started stumbling over one particular word, saying it 3 or 4 times over before his arms just dropped to his sides. That's when I noticed that he happened to have been standing almost right in the middle of that wooden triangle, the one with all that weird-looking symbols on it. Lit up only by the flashlights we had on their helmets and weapons, the Surg guy started twitching, real subtly at first, but then the twitches got more and more violent. Then he started talking again, only everything that came out of his mouth sounded like complete gibberish. Only it wasn't just gibberish. It was incomprehensible, all right, but just like the symbols on that big wooden triangle, it was like purposeful. There was a meaning behind all the stuff he said, even if it was a meaning that none of us could recognize or understand. The other Surg guys tried to help him, asking what was wrong and trying to contact their command to call in help, but their communications weren't working. Someone back at the cordon must have disabled them. That's when they asked me and the other operator to check our comms and call in help if we could. I actually moved to do so, and that's when I heard the voice come through my earpiece again. It just said, "Horus," which is my call sign. Do not engage. Observation only. I just put my hands back on my weapon and did as I was told, focusing my eyes and my helmet cam back on the Surg guys. Then, I swear to God, Mom, I swear on Grandpa's grave, I watched as the guy's eye protection began to fill with some kind of dark fluid. It started slowly, but then it was clear for all to see. His goggles were filling up with blood. And as it started to leak out down his cheeks and around his nose, the Surg guys started freaking out. They were trying their comms again, screaming into their mouthpieces that they needed urgent assistance. And when they turned to us again, there was anger in their voices. One told us, "Don't just stand there." Another asked us, "What the hell's wrong with you?" But I just did as I was ordered, Mom. I just stood there and watched as the guy's words were choked off by something in his throat. And then, in an instant that horrified every single person in that cellar, something started to come out of his mouth. Not blood, though. Something solid and organic, like his own lungs were trying to crawl out from between his teeth. But they couldn't have been his lungs, because although they were all fleshy and pink, just like regular organic tissue. The things that came out of his mouth were all long and thin, almost like the limbs of an octopus or squid. Right after that, we heard Command say something into our earpieces. Affected agent is declared hostile. Open fire. I almost couldn't believe what I was hearing. They wanted me to shoot that guy, Mom. Only, I hesitated. I couldn't do it. They train you to shoot the bad guys, Mom. They don't train you to murder your own. Like I said, I hesitated, but the other operators didn't. He just raised his rifle and started shooting. But he didn't just shoot the guy a few times. He shot him until he fell, until the blue-white light flickered out and left his eyes. Then he carried on firing into the guy's head and neck as he lay in the dirt, and he kept shooting until there was barely anything left. The SIRG guys were about ready to execute the other operator right there and then. One even had his weapon pointed at the guy, telling him to put down his rifle and put his hands in the air. I think they actually thought that they were going to arrest the guy there and then, but they had no idea what was about to come next. Right then, as the SIRG guys are completely freaking out, ready to just about lynch the other operator, who I only know as Apis, the SIRG comms flickered back to life over all our radios and told them all to stand down. Orders then came down for the SIRG guys to remain in place while the CIED operators, which meant us, were to exfil from the cabin. I was scared they might shoot us in the back as we climbed out of the root cellar, but they didn't. They just did as they were told. Theirs not to reason why, just like one of them had said. As we walked outside, I got the first of many sick-to-my-stomach feelings I've had over the past 24 hours or so. About 20 yards away from the front entrance, there was another team from our unit, and in front of them was 4 body bags, enough to hold each member of the SIRG team. 3 of them were the jet black I've become all too familiar with during my time in the military, but another was unlike any of the body bag I'd ever seen before, bright orange. I don't think I need to tell you which of the SIRG team was to go in that one. Me and Apis were told to stand by as the other team, who all wore the same, all-black, unmarked uniforms our unit normally wears, went into the cabin to collect the body of the dead SIRG agent. Only 2 re-emerged carrying the bright orange body bag, and just as I started to wonder what the others might be doing, I heard a few screams in unison, then the sound of a grenade going off. The explosion was followed by a few shots before everything went quiet. That quiet was only broken by the sound of a voice coming from behind us, a voice saying, "A fine job you did in there, boys." When I turned, I saw the voice came from a short, middle-aged man wearing a tweed jacket while flanked by 2 more black-clad operators. He looked like a librarian and he spoke like one too, in this quiet, almost relaxed voice, one full of calm and confidence. He told Apis to join the rest of the unit in loading what he called the sample onto a waiting chopper back at the cordon. And looking at me, he smiled, and in that same calm librarian's tone, he told me something to the effect of, "I know you're a member of the team, but I don't want you to hesitate like that again. Swiftness of obedience is crucial to our operators' effectiveness, a requirement for moving forward. And that's very, very important. Because for you, there is no going back now." They don't allow us to read any news from outside here, Mom, but I can imagine what the headline said. 4 FBI agents killed in counter-terror raid, while the article goes on to say how they made the ultimate sacrifice in some courageous attempt to bring in some dangerous terrorist, one who opted to blow everyone to pieces rather than be taken alive. But the truth is, we killed them, Mom. We killed our own guys out there. And I can't be a part of it. I won't be a part of it. I'm going to find a way of sending you this letter after I escape from the base here, but I know they'll be coming to look for me, so I can't come home just yet. Like that guy said, there's no going back for me now. Not if they have anything to do with it. I promise I'll be in touch as soon as I can, but please, when you're done reading this, just burn it. If there's evidence that I've contacted you, that you knew I was going to escape, God knows what they'll do to you to get me to come back. Just please know that I love you, Dad, and Steph with all my heart, and that I'll do anything to make sure we can all be together again someday. I love you, Mom. Stay safe, and don't tell them a goddamn thing. Your loving son, Jake. Operator 734-812 was apprehended not far from the Foundation facility following his attempted desertion on the night of March 18, 2017. He has since been terminated, with false records of mental health conditions being planted in his U.S. Navy psych history. To all outside observers, Operator 734-812 suffered from complex post-traumatic stress disorder following his return from Manbij, Syria, with these ongoing mental health problems causing a catastrophic breakdown around the same time he volunteered at the Foundation. Operator 734-812 has since been entered into the National Missing and Unidentified Persons System and will remain on said system until he is declared deceased in absentia. The director has recommended a complete review of all recruit psychological testing programs, with new procedures set to come into effect by the end of the year. Although the encounter with SCP-427195 was Horace's first, we must more readily assure the psychological preparedness of potential recruits prior to their deployment. The clandestine integrity of the Foundation is to be maintained at all times. We must ensure that no other incidents of this nature are allowed to take place. Assistant Director, Acre, 002-696. I remember it like it was yesterday, the day we heard a soft, high-pitched sound coming from the bedroom closet where our water heater was kept. It must have been just after 6 a.m. and I had to go to work that morning, so the fact that I'd been woken up and was about to lose sleep over a faulty water heater did not put me in the best of moods. Me waking up must have awakened David too. That, or he heard the same noise that I did. Either way, he groggily asked me what the matter was. Water heater's making weird noises, I remember telling him. Can you go look? Sounds selfish of me, I know, but that day was one of his days off. Loss of sleep on his part would be a minor inconvenience. Loss of sleep on my part would be a real pain in the ass. He just grunted, rolled out of bed, then trudged over towards the closet to take a look. But then, as soon as he opened up the closet door, and I got to hearing those high-pitched noises clearer, I knew it wasn't the heater on the fritz. As I sat up in bed, I saw the dumbstruck expression on David's face. His mouth was agape. His eyes were wide and bloodshot. And as I crept out of bed and over to the closet to confirm what I already knew in my gut, I couldn't help but state the obvious. It's a baby, I remember saying. I know what it is, honey, he replied, too stunned to sound remotely patronized. But how did it... I didn't finish the question. It seemed too ridiculous to ask, but we were both thinking it. How in the hell did it get there? The bare infant was lying on its back on the wooden floor of the closet, gently mewling, eyes closed, arms and legs making delicate movements in the dim light. When David moved to pick it up, pure astonishment had me holding him back for a second. It was a caution brought on by pure, fearful instinct. Nothing about it made the slightest bit of sense, yet it was only a matter of seconds before the disbelief was overridden by the surrogate desire to care for it. I quickly deduced that the best course of action was to call the Child Protective Services when their phone line opened up at 9:30 a.m. We could take our sweet time trying to work out how the hell the baby had gotten there. The priority was getting it the care it needed. Only thing was, I was due into work at 9, so I'd have to leave David to deal with it, then check up on him during my lunch break. It felt almost wrong to leave him alone with that kind of responsibility, but I had to go to work that day. And besides, the idea of using "a baby just appeared in my closet" as an excuse to call out of work made me think my boss would either assume I was going crazy or think I was trying to insult their intelligence. Now at work, I couldn't sum up an ounce of focus, so I spent almost the entire morning texting David in search of updates. He called CPS around 9:30 and was kept on hold until like 9:45. The woman who answered his call thought it was some kind of prank at first, but once he had assured her that he was for real, she took the same attitude as us. Get the kid the care it needs, then fill in the gaps later. She told David that since we're dealing with an infant, our call would take priority and she'd have someone call over to the apartment by 11 a.m. to collect it. It was a weight off my mind, but one that was quickly replaced with all the questions we'd chosen to put off, the primary being, how did it get there? In theory, someone could have placed it in the closet, as the back wall was connected to the neighboring apartment, and as much as it seemed impossible that someone removed and replaced a section of wall without waking us up, it remained the only plausible explanation. Just after 11 a.m., I texted David for an update. He told me he was still waiting for CPS agent to show up, and it made sense that they might be a little late. But when 11:30 and 11:45 rolled by and they still hadn't arrived, he told me he called them back to see what the holdup was. That was the last I heard from him. I texted him 2 or 3 more times to get an update, and when he failed to reply, I called just as many times without getting an answer. And then, at 12:30 p.m., when my lunch break started, I practically ran down to my car and drove back to the apartment to see what was going on. It was about a 20-minute drive from my office to the apartment block we lived in, and around halfway into the journey, I got a call from an unknown number that I answered using my hands-free. "Hi there. Can I speak to Katie Weston, please?" a voice asked. "Speaking," I replied. This is Mona West from Child Protective Services. We had a call from your boyfriend this morning regarding an abandoned infant found at your address. An agent just called over, but there's no answer from the apartment number he gave us. Can you, get him to call us back at the earliest possible convenience to rearrange another pickup?" "Sure, of course, we'll call you back ASAP," I said, unable to understand why David wouldn't have answered the door. The caller thanked me before hanging up, and as I finished the remainder of the drive, I felt a deep concern bubbling up inside me. I pulled into our apartment building parking lot, shut off the engine, and rushed to the back door to let myself in. I climbed the stairs, walked down the corridor to our apartment, then, as I slid my key into the lock and opened up the door, I called out David's name. There was no reply. I couldn't imagine where he had taken the poor little thing, but my best guess, the one that had that concern reaching boiling point, was that he had taken it to the ER for some reason. I'd like to be able to tell you that walking into our living room answered my questions, how the sight that greeted me helped make sense of what was going on, but in reality, what I saw horrified me beyond all comprehension. Lying on the carpet, in the middle of the wooden floor, was a dead body, barely recognizable as human. The clothes it once wore had been torn to blood-soaked rags, and huge chunks of flesh were missing from just about everywhere you can imagine. Its face was completely gone, the abdominal cavity was almost completely empty, and the flesh of its thighs had been torn away until bloody strips of femur were visible in the bright midday light. Leaning over the body, on their knees, was a fully grown adult. They were completely naked, covered in blood, and they were in the process of reaching down to tear off hunks of raw skin and muscle with their bare teeth. They were completely bald, lacking any eyebrows or body hair, and as they looked up at me, half-chewed lumps of meat tumbled out of their mouth and down onto the gore-soaked carpet. That's when I saw the bloody naked person that kneeled in front of me had David's face. It had his face. I recognized that in an instant, but it most certainly wasn't him. He never would have spoke to me that way that thing did, because The only word out of its mouth was an infantile, hopeful, "Mama?" I was frozen in place for a few seconds, unable to move, unable to scream. It was like all the electrical signals in my body had just shut off for a moment, and no matter how hard my brain screamed for me to run, I just couldn't. The thing with David's face simply stared back at me, a sickeningly warm smile curling the corner of its half-open mouth as bloody drool began to pour off of its chin. It was only when it began to stand that my modal abilities returned to me, and in a blind panic, I bolted out of the apartment, down the stairs, and back out to my car. When my 911 call reached an operator, I knew I couldn't tell them what appeared to have happened. Instead, I just focused on what would actually make sense to them, telling the operator that there had been a murder at my apartment, that the killer was still there, and how I needed the cops to show up as soon as they were able. Then right in the middle of them taking my details, the call seemed to cut off entirely. For a second or two, there was nothing but dead air on the line. Then when it reconnected, the voice I heard was distorted, different, practically robotic. "Remain in your vehicle. When officers arrive, you will identify yourself, then await further instruction. Thank you for your cooperation." I knew something was wrong as soon as I'd heard that droning, robotic voice. I never heard anything like that during a 911 call before, but I was in no fit state to question anything. Whatever was going on up in my apartment was way beyond my control, and if someone, somewhere, had decided it was beyond the police's control too, then so be it. Within minutes, a large sliding door police van was screeching into the parking lot of my apartment building. As much as the officers that piled out of the center door looked like a SWAT team, there was nothing on their uniforms to denote it. As soon as they arrived, I got out of my car, walked over to them, and identifying myself just as I'd been instructed. Without a word, one of them took me by the arm and began forcefully dragging me over towards the van. I asked them what the hell they were doing, told them I wasn't a criminal, and that the murderer was up in my apartment. They didn't seem to listen or care, and just before they seated me in the van, they tied my wrists with a pair of black riot cuffs before blindfolding me. Not only that, but they put what I assumed were a pair of noise-canceling earmuffs on my head. If it had been any other kind of situation, I'd have kicked up much more of a stink. But given all the things that I'd just seen and heard, I had absolutely no mental capacity to anything but comply. Then as I felt the van begin to shift and tilt with movement, and I realized I was being driven somewhere, I began to shake and I began to weep. I still couldn't make sense of everything I'd seen, and although the thing in my apartment was wearing his face, I knew in my heart that David was dead. I'm not sure how long we drove for. It probably felt much longer than it actually was. But when I felt the vibrations of the van's engine finally cease, I was led deaf and blind for a prolonged period of time before being sat down in a hard plastic chair. When the blindfold and the earmuffs came off, I was sitting in what looked like a police interview room. Everything was gray, from the walls to the furniture to the dull simmer of the one-way glass to the side of me. Sat on the chair opposite was a man who reminded me of a high school history teacher. He wore a tweed jacket and a bow tie, with curly brown hair cresting a heavily receded hairline. When he spoke, his tone of voice was positively relaxing, something I actually welcomed at the time, since it kept me from descending into a full-on panic attack. But there was something behind that fatherly lilt, something threatening that I couldn't put my finger on until the threat was placed directly in front of me. "Hello, Katie," the man said with a warm smile on his face. "My name is Wendell. How you feeling today?" Under the circumstances, the question seemed like a sick joke. I just experienced a waking nightmare and coming face to face with a hellish parody of the man I loved, a man that was now dead. "Where am I?" was all I could think to ask. "Somewhere safe," the man replied, his smile widening to reveal a flash of yellowing teeth. "You're safe now, but I'm afraid I have some bad news for you."
"Bad news?"
I asked.
"But where's David?"
"I'm sorry to be the one to have to tell you this, Katie," the man said, "but David passed away this morning." I felt a lump returning my throat, and as my eyes filled with tears, I nodded.
"I know, I saw that thing."
As the words left my lips, a bemused expression came over the man's face.
"What thing, Katie?" "The thing in my apartment. It was eating him."
My voice strained as visions of the horror I'd witnessed flashed in my mind's eye.
"Ah,"
the man said, as he gave me an understanding nod.
"I think what you're expressing is a rather atypical stress reaction. It's understandable for someone in your position to try to, how do we put this? Reject reality when faced with such an overwhelming tragedy." "Reject reality?"
I asked, indignancy replacing the fear and grief.
"I'm not rejecting anything. I know what happened. I know what I saw. It was the baby. The baby we found this morning. It... Katie."
The man cut me off, using my name the way a school teacher might chastise a child.
"You didn't find any baby this morning. This is all just a manifestation of your grief. You're suffering from a mental break right now, but that's something we can help you with." "You can help me by catching that thing that murdered my boyfriend."
"Katie, listen to me." The man talked slowly, as if trying to induce understanding. "There was a gas explosion. That's what killed David. Firefighters have been trying to put out the blaze for the last few hours. Nothing killed David. It was just a horrible accident."
"You're a liar,"
I screeched.
"You're lying to me. I know what I saw. It ate him. It took his face. It ate him."
As I looked across the table into the man's eyes, I couldn't tell if he genuinely didn't believe me or if it was all an elaborate act. It was inconceivable to me that I'd simply imagined the whole thing. If I had, I wouldn't have been sitting there, having been deafened and blindfolded before being taken to God knows where. And that's when my mind, flooded by a deluge of questions I was unable to contain for another moment.
"Who the hell are you anyway?"
"I already told you, Katie," the man replied. "My name is Wendell."
"Then who do you work for?"
I asked.
"Are you a cop? A doctor? Where the hell am I?"
"Again, you're someplace safe, Katie, and the people I work with only want to help you. But if you insist on repeating your delusions, if you refuse to accept reality, we'll have no choice but to detain you for your own protection."
"Detain me where?"
I asked, feeling the lump returning to my throat. "Somewhere you won't like. Somewhere that'll be difficult for you to leave." There it was, the threat. And by that point, the choices laid out for me were clear as day. Either I went along with their lie, or they'd declare me insane and lock me up in some goddamn mental asylum. "Everything's gonna be okay, Katie," the man continued. "You just have to help us. Help you. I understand your employer offers some rather extensive medical insurance, and that should cover the cost of any counseling or medication you might receive. I hear Wellbutrin can work miracles when it comes to grief management. You don't want to help me." My voice trembled as tears rolled down my cheeks.
"You want me to lie. You want me to peddle some goddamn cover-up, and I can't do it."
"Katie, the man said, lowering his voice as he leaned over the table. My mother, God rest her soul, used to tell me that we can do anything we want if we put our minds to it. After that, he produced a sheet of paper from a binder that lay next to him. It was a statement, one with a blank dotted line at the bottom. All you have to do, he said, pointing to the dotted line, is sign here, and the healing process can begin. You're not giving me a choice, are you? I asked. We always have a choice, Katie, the man replied. But right now, yours is between helping David's family or causing them further pain and hardship. Sign that statement, make it official, and the company responsible for the explosion pays them a very handsome settlement. And that's what broke me. David had hardly anything saved, and he definitely had no life insurance. If this family couldn't have the terrible truth, they could at least be fiscally comfortable for the remainder of their lives. I need a pen, I remember saying. And as the man calling himself Wendell reached into the pocket of his tweed jacket, a look of disgusting satisfaction twisted his face. It's been almost 3 years to the day since David passed away. He was the kindest, sweetest, most gentle person I've ever met, and for that reason, I won't lie about his death any longer. I still don't know exactly what killed him, but I know there's something to be gained from a cover-up. A cover-up means it'll happen again, that someone else will be cursed to live through the same nightmare I did, and I wouldn't wish that on anyone, not even my worst enemy. And that's why I'm writing this. People need to know. I don't care if they come for me. I don't care if they make me disappear. If this is out there, if it's copied and shared, if by some miracle it goes viral, they won't be able to hide it any longer. David was murdered by something ugly and unnatural, and unless those people actually caught it and killed it, it could be your closet it shows up in next. I was never the romantic type, but I don't think you could blame me. Mom and Dad fought like cats and dogs, going through a messy divorce when my sister and I were still young. I didn't believe in true love. I didn't think there was the one. But that all changed when I met Sophie Norris. I was a city kid. I spent all my time hanging around Boston Common with my buddies before we stuffed our faces with meatball subs up in the North End. She was a country girl. She spent all her time on the family farm out in Iowa, playing in the cornfields and eating lovely home-cooked meals. She was a college student and didn't mind that I was a few years older, nor did she care about my dead-end job unloading ships at the harbor. We just clicked. She was everything I wasn't. She was smart, patient, well-read. She took an interest in the arts. She was beautiful, and the more we dated, the more I found myself catching feelings. By the time summer came around, I couldn't bear to go like 3 months without seeing her, so we arranged for me to drive out to Iowa to visit her and her family on the farm. I was ecstatic. Despite her progressive attitude, she was in many respects a deeply traditional girl, so I knew the key to her heart was winning over her parents, and I was more than prepared to do that. So when the day came, I packed my stuff, loaded up my car, and set off for Iowa. It goes without saying that it was a long drive, 19 hours in total, with an overnight stop in a Detroit motel. It was tedious in the extreme, but the prospect of being reunited with her spurred me on. She had given me an address and rough directions, but getting lost among the miles upon miles of cornfields was way too easy. I couldn't call her to ask her to guide me in. She had warned me that the cell service in her area was spotty. so I drove up and down a stretch of road just south of Emmetsburg until I found someone to ask directions from. They'd never heard of the Norris family farm, but they told me they knew of an old dirt road near a place called Rush Lake. I thanked them, but they warned me it wasn't the kind of place that strangers were welcome. I wasn't about to let that deter me though, so I set off in search of it and eventually found the place they were referring to. I immediately understood what they meant. An old hand-painted wooden sign told trespassers that they would be shot. Yet I drove down the dirt road anyways, telling myself that the rewards far outweighed the risks. After about half a mile of trudging along that old dirt road, I passed through an open wooden gate that led to a big old farmhouse, a cattle shed, and a huge red barn. Frankly, it was amazing that any strangers found themselves wandering onto that place at all. It was tucked away among the corn, a little slice of cloistered heaven, far away from prying eyes. At first, I wasn't sure if I had the right place. Not until I saw Sophie walk out onto the porch of the farmhouse, an expression of delight on her face. She ran up to the car as I climbed out of the driver's seat, beyond excited to hug her for the first time in weeks.
"Alex, you made it. You actually came," she chirped. Her voice quivered as she fought back tears and fell into my arms. "Of course I did. I missed you too much." We broke our embrace just in time for me to see her family congregating on the porch, and they were exactly what I expected from her descriptions of them. Her barrel-chested father, arms folded in his denim dungarees, looked on with a vague suspicion, while her mother smiled warmly at the heartwarming reunion. But I didn't quite expect her brother to be so huge. He was her junior by a number of years, and for some reason the image of him as a young boy had cemented in my mind. To see him now with his frankly colossal stature was rather intimidating. "Come meet the family," she said, taking me by the hand and eagerly leading me towards the house. It was early on Friday evening when I finally arrived, just in time for dinner, and as Sophie's mom laid out a spread of roasted meat and vegetables, I made my introductions. "Good to finally have you here," Mr. Norris said in a deep, gravelly voice. "We've heard a lot about you." "All good, I hope," I replied nervously. Glowing, but I told her, if something seems too good to be true. "Amos, don't be so rude. This young man's traveled a long way to be here," Mrs. Norris exclaimed before turning to me. "I'm so sorry about my husband. He's a man of many skills, but his socials are sorely lacking." "I get it, ma'am. He's just protective of his daughter." "You see, Mona, the boy gets it," he said before turning back to me. Sophie said you were a smart one, but how is it that someone so smart didn't end up going to college?" "Victim of circumstance, I suppose. Family finances weren't great." I remained polite, but the question hit a nerve. "I guess I wanted to learn the value of hard work before I tried higher education. Something that you obviously know all too well. You must have worked your butt off to be able to afford her college fees." It was a compliment engineered to make Mr. Norris smile with pride, but nothing registered on his face. Sophie didn't have any loans and wanted for nothing. I had a huge amount of respect for her father long before I'd ever met him. "So, Mr. Norris, do you sell produce directly to the supermarkets, or are there like distributors or something?" I asked. Sophie's mom and dad shot each other a look before her dad cleared his throat apprehensively. We're not a selling farm, son," he began. "We're purely subsistence out here. Let's just say I've been lucky with a few investments I made over the years, but enough small talk. Finish your food and I'll show you around. You got a lot of work to help me with tomorrow." I really did try to finish what was on my plate. I was half starved from the day's long drive, but there was something about the way the meat tasted, something slightly bitter and nauseating about it. I've never been a fan of liver, and I suppose that's what it was. Being a subsistence farm, there was a good chance that they ate every single part of the animals they slaughtered. But God help me if I offended them in the first hours of meeting them.
so I ate as much as I could stomach, then made out like I was full. There was only one reason why I found myself just slightly hesitant to visit Sophie on her family's farm. That was the fact that, as she had explicitly told me, her father would expect anyone willing to date or marry his daughter of being capable of working on the farm. In her words, a good farmhand showed diligence and fortitude, things that she too hoped to find in a potential partner, let alone what her father would expect of them. I considered myself a hard worker, and working down at the harbor could be physically grueling on occasion, but I knew it would pale in comparison to the kind of things that Mr. Norris would have me doing. The wake-up call came at 4:30 a.m. I thought it was hardcore for getting up at 6:30 for workdays, but here was Sophie's dad, fresh as a goddamn daisy while the sun had barely even grazed the sky. "Get up, boy. We got work to do. Meet me at the cattle shed in 15 minutes. We'll see what you're made of." It was extremely early, but that wasn't why I was so tired. I'd hardly slept a wink, having felt terrible all night. I'd never really eaten liver before, and I guess it just didn't agree with me. So there I was, exhausted, stumbling towards a cow shed in the middle of rural Iowa at a truly ungodly hour. I lit myself a cigarette as soon as I walked outside. If I didn't have time for a coffee, I sure as hell was getting a smoke in before work commenced. But as soon as Sophie's dad laid eyes on the lit butt between my fingers, he scowled. "You know, Sophie didn't mention you were a smoker." Yeah, I'm trying to quit. She keeps pushing me to give up. You obviously brought her up to be. Life is precious." Mr. Norris interrupted. "A man should do everything in his power to give himself longevity. Give that thing to me." I took one last drag on it before handing it over, watching as he walked over to a nearby trash can, stamped it out, and threw it away. "Don't smoke that crap on my farm again, boy." He struck me as the kind of man who could be very warm when he wanted to be, but in that moment, the look in his eyes struck the fear of God into me. "Ever milk a cow before?" he said after a long and uncomfortable silence. "No, sir." "Well, you're gonna learn today." As he led me into the cattle shed, the first thing that struck me was the smell. Thanks to an 8th grade field trip, I'd been around farm animals before, but I'd never smelled anything so awful in my entire life. A stench of rot and sour milk. Mr. Norris set up a stool near one of the cows, then proceeded to roll up his shirt sleeves. He told me to watch carefully, and for a few moments I did, but my eyes were quickly drawn elsewhere. I'd never seen a cow as sickly as that, ever. She was skeletal. Her eyes were a milky white around the pupils. I watched in disgust as a fat, black housefly landed right on the soft, moist lining of her eye. She didn't seem to react at all. "Hey, I told you, pay attention," Mr. Norris suddenly growled. Yes, sir. Sorry, sir." I turned my attention back to the milk pail that sat beneath the cow's wrinkled udders, mapped by a web of black veins. What was in that milk pail looked wrong. It looked sour, like it had the consistency of yogurt. But I watched as Sophie's dad took a small metal ladle, scooped up a little bit of the thick, gooey liquid, and brought it to his lips with a wet slurp. "Ain't nothing like it. Strengthens the bones. Here, try some," he said, offering me the ladle. "I'm good, thanks. Maybe a little too early for me." "Suit yourself," he said, taking another slurp before letting the ladle's contents slide back into the pail with a sickening slosh. "Now go wash up and get yourself some breakfast. Next, I need you in the beet field." Back at the farmhouse, I found Sophie and her mom preparing breakfast as I sat down at the kitchen table with her older brother. "How you doing, big guy? You sleep well?" I said to him. He gave me a cold stare, not saying a word in reply. "Don't mind him," Sophie's mom chimed in. "He's a quiet one, always has been." "Strong, silent type," I said. "I like it." I turned back to him, but there was nothing behind his eyes. I raised a hand to give him a gentle wave, but he didn't move, just stayed stone still as he waited for his breakfast. Sophie put down a plate of scrambled eggs in front of me, but I found them just as unpalatable as last night's meal. I tried to fill up with the toast that stacked up on the table, but even that stuff I had to force down. Yet, what I found deeply disconcerting was that Sophie and her brothers seemed to relish their meals, like they couldn't taste anything amiss with them at all. And it's not that Sophie didn't know good food. We had spent a lot of time in some of the finest restaurants in all of New England, probably in the entire country, and she was quite the connoisseur. I was barely finished eating before Sophie's dad poked his head into the kitchen. "All right, enough rest. Beet field. 5 minutes." I cleared my plate, apologizing to Sophie's mom that my appetite must have just been off, then trudged out to the beet field to meet her dad. "This one should be easy, even for a city boy like you," he said, kneeling among rows of neatly planted greenery. "You gotta get a good firm grip on the leaves here, right at the stem, then twist as you pull them out of the ground, see?" He demonstrated his technique and then left me to get on with the work. Basket in hand, I kneeled down into the dirt, pulled up beets just like he'd shown me. I was exhausted, barely paying attention to what I was doing, until pulling one particular beet left a stain in my hand. I had to double check to make sure that I hadn't accidentally cut myself on something. The texture in the color wasn't like anything I'd ever seen from a beetroot, even down to how sticky it felt when I rubbed the juice between my fingers. "What are you staring at, boy?" Mr. Norris scared the hell out of me, having crept up from God knows where. Are these things meant to leak like this?" "Sometimes. When they're fresh, sure. But the color. Best goddamn beets in the entire country. Not like that crap you find in your goddamn super-duper marts." "I mean, I suppose." "Enough talk," he said, picking up the full basket of beets before placing another empty one down next to me. "You're going to pick another basketful, and then you're going to come help me with the corn." He turned and walked away, muttering something under his breath as he did so. I picked my way along another row of the beets, trying to keep my mind off of how peculiar they seemed. But as he was so quick to remind me I was just a city kid, out here where I didn't belong, working on something I was totally unfamiliar with. So who was I to question the quality of their produce? I just kept my mind on Sophie and carried on with the task at hand. Around noon, I met Mr. Norris in the cornfield. "You did all right with those beets. Now let's see with the corn." Again, he demonstrated the proper technique for tearing off the ears, tossing them in a basket before leaving me to it. It was considerably easier than pulling beets, the repetitive motion of which had left a dull ache in my shoulder. But just like the beets, I noticed something rather strange about this produce too. The husk that coated the corn itself felt like old dry skin, the kind that forms on a cut or graze after it's scabbed over. But that wasn't what freaked me out. What had the hairs rising on the back of my neck was that I noticed something dark and black on one of the corn husks in a very familiar shape. It appeared to be faded black ink in the shape of a heart, one that looked like an old tattoo. Just then, I heard a rustling in the cornfield behind me. "Mr. Norris? Is that you?" I called out, but there was no reply. I turned, staring into the vast green ocean of tall green stalks before me. I took a few steps forward, trying to get a glimpse of whatever just made the noise, and felt my heart thump when I heard the same rustling, this time accompanied by a swaying among the tops of nearby corn stalks. Someone or something was definitely in there, just feet away from me, just out of sight. I moved along the rows with dreadful anticipation when suddenly I saw them, a pair of black eyes staring back at me from the shadows. As soon as that thing's gaze met mine, it darted off through the cornfield in the opposite direction, grunting as it went. I had no idea what I just locked eyes with, but it was short and covered in thick, dark fur. For a few moments after the distant rustling died down, a dreadful silence hung in the air, broken only by the sound of a gruff voice coming from behind me. "You call for me, boy?" It was Mr. Norris, having almost frightened the life out of me for the second time that day.
Jesus, I think I saw something in the field there.
Saw what?
I don't know exactly. I think it was a pig.
We don't keep pigs on this farm, boy. Only cows.
Well, it certainly looked like a pig. Only it was all covered in hair, this thick, black...
Well, may have been a wild pig. They break through the fences sometimes, eat up all our produce, but it's not entirely a bad thing. I'll get the shotgun and head back out into the fields later on tonight. Might have some fresh meat on the table tomorrow.
Yeah, it must be a real problem trying to keep interlopers at bay. We have the same problem down at the harbor, only it's not like we can use a shotgun to fix the situation.
I laughed, and he didn't. It was then that another thought came to mind, one that had a question attached.
So is all your stuff here organic, Mr. Norris?
Organic? He threw the word back at me like it was another language.
Yeah, like not using any nasty pesticides or anything like that?
It had certainly explained why some of his produce was so different.
We don't have that problem this farm, boy.
And that's when it hit me. It was high summer. There should have been flies, beets, aphids, and insects of all varieties buzzing around the fields. It dawned on me that I hadn't seen or heard a single one at any point in the day. I was just about to ask him another question when Mr. Norris cut me off.
Now come on. We're just about done here. Let's head back to the house. But I barely filled the I won't tell you again, boy. Come on.
I spent the remainder of the afternoon with Sophie, hanging out down by a stream which ran through the property. Sitting in the grass and talking with her made me forget just how strange the whole day's events had seemed. And besides, getting up at 4:30 in the morning has a way of dulling your senses of perception. When I was with her, I didn't have a care in the world, and no amount of weird vegetables or cranky old farmers could change that.
I don't think your dad likes me very much. That's just the way he is. He'll warm up to you in time. You just gotta prove yourself. Prove myself how? You gotta show that you can be part of this family. And I'll be honest, that ain't gonna be easy, but you'll manage it. If you love me, you'll find a way to manage it.
And that was all that I needed to hear. I did love her, more than I thought was ever possible. In that moment, I was still prepared to do whatever it took to win her parents' approval. That evening, after another dinner in which I forced down more of Mrs. Norris's terrible cooking, I decided to get an early night so I'd be ready for more hard labor the next morning. Obviously, Sophie and I weren't sleeping in the same bed, so I wished her a good night and climbed the stairs to the guest room, where I fell asleep pretty much as soon as my head hit the pillow. However, just a few hours later, I found myself awakened by a rumbling in my stomach. For the second night running, Mrs. Norris's home cooking had not agreed with me. Only this time I had to sneak off to the bathroom to empty my stomach as quietly as possible for fear of waking up the rest of the family. But not all of them were sleeping, as I heard voices coming from downstairs as I crept back across the landing. It was Mr. and Mrs. Norris, having some kind of hushed disagreement in the kitchen.
Can't go out there, Amos. You just can't.
Mrs. Norris was pleading.
You know I have to. One of them got out today. Sophie's boy almost ran into it in the cornfield.
Implored her husband.
Can't you just leave them be? If it catches you out there before you see it, then I won't let it.
Mr. Norris interjected.
I've dealt with those things before, and I can do it again. Oh, God, Amos, but what if... Listen to me, woman. If that thing escapes this farm and the world outside finds out what we're doing here, it'll be the end of us. You know that. I know. Just please, I'm begging you, be careful out there.
I will. I listened as Mr. Norris walked down the hall downstairs, hearing the distinct sound of him loading some kind of firearm as he walked. And as he walked out of the house into the night, I crept back into bed and lay there, knowing exactly what he was out there trying to hunt, but wondering just what the hell it really was. The next morning, there was no early wake-up call from Mr. Norris. Instead, I was awakened by Sophie. She'd crept across the hallway as soon as her father had left the house to begin his workday, having decided to sneak in some cuddle time before the rest of the family got up. "Dad says he doesn't need you today," she whispered, climbing into bed and wrapping one of my arms around her. "So it's just me and you today, baby. A whole Sunday together, just like back in Boston." It was bliss, absolute bliss. And for the first time that whole weekend, things just felt right again. Later that morning, as we were sat around the kitchen table, Mrs. Norris spoke up. "Sophie, your brother and I have to head into town today to pick up a few odds and ends. Can you and Alex here be trusted to be alone around the house?" "Is Dad not going with you?" He isn't, but he's got business to attend to around the farm, some repairs and what have you. He might not be back until later this afternoon." "Oh, okay, sure. Me and Alex will keep this place spick and span for you guys. Don't worry." "Good. Now you two make sure you enjoy your last day of Alex's visit, okay?" "Thank you, Mrs. Norris. I really appreciate the sentiment," I said. Sophie's mom was a very sweet lady, but I couldn't help but wonder how she'd ended up with her husband. Not only that, but I wondered just what they'd both been talking about the night before. After Mrs. Norris and her son had left, Sophie and I rushed up to her bedroom to do exactly what young lovers get up to when left alone for a few hours. It was made all the more exciting for me by the fact that Mr. Norris could arrive back pretty much at any moment, and I know Sophie felt the same way. So despite the fact that it was rushed and hushed, I felt like we made up for all that lost time the summer break had burdened us with. When we were done, Sophie got up to take a bath, which left me with little time to explore the house. It was your typical family home in many respects, full of knickknacks, ornaments, drawings, and paintings that Sophie and her brother had done when they were children, not to mention a plethora of family photos hung all around the walls, one of which included a delighted Sophie holding up her acceptance letter from Boston University. But my curiosity definitely got the better of me at one point, and I found myself rooting through bookshelves and cupboards just to see what I could find. In one old cupboard, I found a stack of old photographs, black and white ones that had to have been taken in the 40s or 50s. One in particular showed a man about the same age as Sophie's father, who I suspected to be her paternal grandfather. At least, it had to be, as the man looked almost identical to her dad. He had the same style of denim dungarees on, the same wary expression on his practically indistinguishable face. Another showed a whole family unit, mom, dad, brother, and sister, all lined up in front of the same red barn that stood nearby the house. Each family member bore a disturbingly similar likeness to the people I was staying with that weekend. In fact, if you'd have told me that it was just a picture of them taken with an old-style camera, I'd have believed you, no questions asked. But I didn't focus on the likeness for too long, as something in the background of the photograph caught my eye. It was a blurry, dark shape that looked to be peering around the edge of the barn. But given the poor quality of the photograph, there was no way for me to distinguish exactly what it was. Now suitably weirded out, I put the photos away and continued my exploration of the house. I found myself exploring the kitchen area, admiring some of the older, more antiquated food preparation devices that were obviously still in use. I thought about how much my mom would freak if she saw some of this stuff. She loved anything rustic like that and always used to tell me how it reminded her of her childhood in rural Massachusetts. I made my way into the family's pantry, admiring some of the hand-labeled cans of vegetables that obviously contained products from the farm itself. Sure, I found their way of living to be a little strange, but there was still something deeply charming about it, even if it was adversely alien to what I was accustomed to back home. But at the back of one of the cupboards there, I found something that made my jaw drop. It was a large burlap sack, full of coins. I'm not talking small denominations. These were huge and appeared to be solid silver. Not silver dollars either. They would have been strange, but at least explainable. These things looked like they were huge chunks of solid silver. A little side note here, an uncle of mine owned a pawn shop in Charleston for most of his life, and he would often bore us to tears with stories of people who tried to rip him off with frauds of fakes. But I remembered the detail of one particular story where he told me and my cousin that you could always tell that something was genuine silver by the markings on it. Silver dealers would often stamp silver with a particular number, numbers which indicated the percentage of fine silver in the piece. A stamp of 900 or 800 means the piece is 90% or 80% silver, and is often called coin silver, or, in other words, not totally pure. But the hunks of metal in that burlap sack had no markings on them whatsoever, which I found very suspicious. My uncle also bored us with a foolproof technique of testing whether or not silver was genuine, what he called the ice test. He told us that silver happened to be a particularly good conductor of heat, so if you place a piece of ice on it, the ice starts to melt pretty much immediately, almost like it had been placed on something warm rather than just any regular metal. I made sure the coast was clear, took the coin to the family freezer, and popped a piece of ice out of the ice tray before placing it on the coin. And no shit, the ice started to melt right away. I was dumbstruck. I was holding what appeared to be a piece of pure silver in my hand. No wonder the family could afford to pay Sophie's college fees. They had a huge sack of pure silver just sitting there in their goddamn pantry. And that couldn't have been all of it. At least, that's what I told myself. There had to be more. Much more. Somewhere secure so it would be safe from potential thieves or home invaders. But just where exactly they were getting that stuff from, I had no idea. Mr. Norris had mentioned something to do with investments, but who the hell pays out in silver? And pure silver at that. Silver that was unregulated by international markets. That, coupled with photos, the strange vegetables in the photographs, just who the hell was this family? It was then that I heard footsteps coming from the upper floor. Sophie was out of the bath and was bound to head downstairs at any moment. I scurried back into the pantry, placed the wet piece of silver back in the burlap sack, and then rushed back out and got myself a glass of water to play all innocent with as I heard her coming down the steps. "Alex, what are you doing down here?" she asked, clearly suspicious. "Oh, me?" I replied. Nothing at all, just getting myself a drink is all." I'm a terrible liar, always have been, and she could read it on my face that something was clearly wrong. "Is there something you want to talk to me about?" she asked with an accusatory tone. No, nothing, I mean, what would there be to talk about? I know you haven't been enjoying my mom's cooking." "Hey, it's fine. I mean, I had no idea I was such a fussy eater, but it turns out you keep living and learning, huh?" "Alex, there are things that you should know about this family." Like what?" We're not like other folks, not even folks around here, and there may have been some things you might have seen around the farm this weekend, things that seemed a little off." "What are you trying to say, Sophie?" I asked, but it was a sick charade at that point. The look I was giving her told all she needed to know. "Things like, well, I don't quite know how to tell you this, but..." "Sophie, Alex, you two here?" It was Mr. Norris, with the most imaginable timing. Sophie's expression turned from one of discomfort to one of perkiness. "In here, Dad. Me and Alex were just about to make ourselves a snack." "No time for that just yet. I need Alex to come with me with something. It won't take long, but it's important." Sure, Mr. Norris. I'll be right out." I followed Mr. Norris outside, tracing his footsteps into the cornfield where there were 2 full wheelbarrows full of snow-white corn torn from their fleshy husks. "Give me a hand with these, would you?" I obliged, pushing one of the 2 barrows back towards the house, but as we did so, we passed by the large brick-red barn that stood near the farmhouse. As we approached, I set eyes on the thick wooden paneling, and I began to feel distinctly uneasy. At first, I assumed it was because it reminded me of those old family photos and how the figures in them looked eerily similar to the current occupants of the home. But then I began to hear something coming from inside. I stopped pushing the barrel for a moment and strained my ears to hear what the noise was, and began to hear a faint kind of shuffling sound coming from behind the boards. Mr. Norris had told me that the only livestock on the farm were the cows they kept in the cattle shed, so just what the hell was living in there? It was then that I heard it, a muffled but unmistakable sound of squealing. As I stood there, an obviously confused look on my face, Mr. Norris also stopped wheeling his barrow, turning to look at me with a grave look in his eyes. "What's wrong, boy?" What's in the barn, Mr. Norris?" "Nothing. Just some canning equipment," he replied irritably. I just stared back at him, feeling the anger at being lied to rising in my gut. Mr. Norris dropped his barrow hard into the dark, turning on a dime before he marched over to me. "Are me and you gonna have a fucking problem, son?" He seethed. "No, sir," I replied, more defiant than polite. "Let me tell you something, right fucking now, boy," he growled through gritted teeth. "You don't ever go near this fucking barn, ever. Is that clear?" "Crystal clear," I replied, feeling the adrenaline coursing through me. "If I catch you sniffing around here, at all, you'll never step foot on this farm again, and I'll make damn sure you and Sophie won't be seeing each other anymore. Now, pick that shit up and bring it up to the house." That night's dinner was beyond awkward. Mr. Norris was obviously in a bad mood after our confrontation, and it seemed like the rest of the family were accustomed to treading on eggshells whenever he was tense. The feeling was compounded for me by the fact that not only was I intentionally craving nicotine, but thanks to the bizarre, unpalatable flavors of Mrs. Norris's cooking, I hadn't eaten properly in almost 48 hours. I was starving, but I wasn't about to eat anything that was going to make me sick again. So I found myself just sort of moving the food around my plate, nibbling at bitter-tasting roast potatoes that seemed far too wet and fleshy on the insides. We ate in absolute silence, so that when Sophie's brother dropped his cutlery onto his dinner plate with a loud clatter, the entire table almost jumped out of their seats with fright. I looked up at him, watching as he began to shudder and grunt, his eyes rolling back in their sockets. "What is it, son?" Mrs. Norris asked, a palpable fear in her voice, and for the first time that entire weekend, Sophie's brother spoke. "Hungry." His voice bubbled with phlegm, rasping up from barely used vocal cords. "So hungry." As he sat before a plate of meat and vegetables that was almost completely consumed, I got the distinct impression that he wasn't talking about himself. Mr. Norris rose from the table, his chair legs grinding against the floor. As he did so, his son mirrored his movements perfectly, following him out of the room and out of sight before I heard the front door to the house open and close with a slam. Is he okay?" I asked, pointing after Sophie's brother. "Sure he is. He just like that from time to time. Amos has probably taken him to feed the cows," Mrs. Norris replied, not looking up from her food as she finished off a few last morsels. As strange as the weekend had been by that point, the last thing I was about to do was start asking and probing accusatory questions regarding the guy's obvious disabilities. So I just continued to eat what little I could stomach from the plate in silence before Sophie got up to clear her plate. "Want to come sit on the porch with me?" she asked with a smile. I had been meaning to get some more alone time with her, but not for the reasons you might think, and I agreed, cleared my own plate, and followed her out to watch the sunset. We sat down in a long swing set for a few quiet minutes, holding hands and enjoying the tranquility of the evening. But I was anything but relaxed. and it took quite a while before I found the courage to speak up. By the time I did, the sun was beginning to dip towards the horizon and darkness was setting in fast. Sophie, I think we need to talk. Sure, what's up? Well, you know I'm headed back to Boston in the morning, right? Yeah, and I'm gonna miss you. She gave my hand a gentle squeeze as she spoke. I'll miss you too, but I think you should come with me. What? Why? She asked, turning toward me in confusion. I know this is your home, and I know these people are your family and that you love them, I began. But there's something wrong with this place, Sophie, and I think you know that as well as I do. There's nothing wrong with this place, Alex. Things are the way they've always been here. I told you we were different. Okay, so they're different, and then there's just wrong. I lowered my voice, fearful that one of her family would overhear. Have you seen the cows lately? The shit growing in their fucking fields? This place is bad, Sophie. There's something very wrong going on here. You know, when I invited you out here, I thought there was a chance you'd understand. I thought you might have been open-minded enough to see that we have something special here. And we really do. For a long, long time now, we've been nothing but blessed. Only now do I really know what she meant by that. But at the time, I was simply too blinded by my feelings for her to really put two and two together. I get that you can't see it, I do. This is what you know, but I'm begging you. Please come back to Boston in the morning. It's not safe here, Sophie. No, you don't get it, Alex. I'm safer here than I am anywhere out there. We could have given you something more precious than anything, but you're just too ignorant to understand that. I get that now. So go ahead. Go back home in the morning, but don't bother calling me again. We're done. Wait, what? Are you cannot be serious, I hissed. You're breaking up with me over this shit? This shit, she growled back at me, is my home. And obviously you have a huge problem with that. So just leave. Why bother waiting until morning if this place is so terrible? Go pack your stuff and just get the fuck out of here. Sophie, please, I love you. I tried to continue, but she raised a hand to cut me off. She rose from the swing set, and as she did, I detected a coldness to her person that I'd never felt before in all the time that we were together. Shut up, she barked. You know, now that I think about it, I don't think I feel anything for you anymore. In fact, I'm not even sure I ever did. How can you even say that? I heard my own voice begin to crack under the pressure. This just isn't you, Sophie. Sophie was the same girl that had brought me a single pink rose wrapped up in brown paper and string from her art supplies. She was a hopeless romantic, but it was like that same girl was shriveling up and ebbing away before my very eyes. You were a mistake, Alex. This whole thing was a giant fucking mistake. I struggled to find any words, feeling my lip trembling as I felt my heart tear in two inside my chest. Her reaction was one I never would have expected, not in a million years, not from this girl. She laughed. Oh, what? Don't tell me you're gonna fucking cry, she said with a cruel giggle. And don't embarrass yourself any more than you already have. What the fuck, Soph? I thought you liked dark humor. The question was so out of left field that my head swam with confusion. I had no idea she could be like that. And as I once again struggled to find the words to express how hurt I was, she walked off the porch and back into the house. I took a few moments to compose myself, fighting back tears as I felt my entire world crashing down around me. Cigarette cravings had me feeling like my chest might explode, every fiber of my being craving the drug I tried to cut myself off from. my sole motivation being to impress Sophie's father, to impress Sophie herself. I broke. Walking back inside, I walked straight past the kitchen, past the cold stare of Mrs. Norris and her husband, who had apparently returned during mine and Sophie's argument, and up to the guest room. I rummaged through my things, fishing out the pack of cigarettes I'd stuffed down into the bottom of my pack, and walked back onto the landing. I was practically shivering with anticipation, my nicotine-starved brain reacting with childish excitement as the prospect of my first cigarette in what seemed like forever. But before I did, I had to check in on Sophie. I couldn't risk being thrown off the farm by her father without at least apologizing or saying goodbye first. My footsteps were soft as I approached her bedroom, somewhere I'd never been before. It always felt like some kind of transgression to knock on the door before gently pushing it open. I'd wondered what it was like in there now. I was probably some haven of beautiful paintings and carefully sketched drawings, but I never expected to see what I did when I looked inside. She was painting all right, but she was painting something in black paint that was an identical image to what was plastered all over the walls of her bedroom. At first, I thought it was some kind of symbol, until I began to recognize an almost humanoid shape at the center of each piece. Each image seemed more horrifying than the last, and I found myself just standing there, mouth agape as I surveyed the vision of insanity. Sophie kept on painting for a moment before she heard the door crack on its hinges, slapping jet black paint onto a sheet of white paper before scratching it into that horrific dark shape. The look of fury in her eyes when she turned to see me made her look almost as monstrous as the thing she'd painted. "Get out!" she growled, trembling with rage as her knuckles turned white around the paintbrush. I just edged out of the room, closing it quietly behind me before I walked downstairs and out into the front yard. By that point, I wasn't just shaking from being racked with cravings of addiction. It was pure, terrible confusion that had me trembling and sweating. My idea of Sophie, of this loving, pure-hearted young woman, had been a complete fantasy, a stark difference to the horrible reality. I put a cigarette between my lips, rummaging in the pocket of my jeans for a lighter before bringing a flame to the sweet-smelling tobacco. The release was intense, my head spinning with the nicotine hit as I breathed in a lungful of thick, tar-laden smoke. As the intense waves of relaxation washed over me, I began to think that the whole thing might have been in my head, that I was just stressed to the point of being overly anxious and critical. A city kid who was just out of his depth in a world fit only for the hardiest of people. But in that moment, I found myself wandering back towards the barn, looking over my shoulder to make sure Mr. Norris wasn't watching from a window. And in the quiet of the twilight, I heard that same horrible noise again, coming from the interior of the barn. A muffled snuffling and squealing that made my skin crawl. I had to know what was in there. If my future lay anywhere near this farm, I had to know. I began to walk around the barn, looking for anything unusual, anything that might clue me in to what was being held in there. Around one side, out of sight of the farmhouse, I noticed that a section of smashed boards had recently been replaced. It was a shoddy job, and I quickly stamped out my lit cigarette on the ground, taking out a small knife I had kept on my keychain before I began to pry away the boards. With each one I loosened, the noises from inside became louder and louder, and it became obvious what I was hearing. There were pigs in there, but the noises they made were like nothing I'd ever heard before. Once I'd cleared a large enough hole, I got down on my hands and knees and began to crawl through the gap into the dark interior of the barn. I slapped at my hands and arms, feeling things crawling all over them before I managed to find my feet. I could feel the cobwebs clinging to my hair before I dusted them off, fishing in my pocket again for my phone so I could bring up the flashlight app. As I turned it on, and the bright white light shone over the interior of the barn, what I saw first was inexplicable and alien to me that, at first, I had trouble processing what it was. There was a large table set in front of me, and on it lay a broken, butchered animal cadaver. Only, there was something horrifyingly familiar about the shape of the thing, how its legs seemed to be a little too long, how its face seemed to be a little too flat. Then it hit me. It was the same thing that I'd seen in the cornfield that day. The same thing that had been looking back at me with squinty, obsidian black eyes. But it couldn't have been. This thing was much larger, at least 5 feet from stem to stern, while the thing in the cornfield couldn't have been any taller than a few feet at best. I approached the table slowly, shining the phone's light over the thing as fat black flies buzzed idly as they feasted on the remains. Whatever it was had been surrounded by melted, burned-out candles, with strange black carvings cut into the wood surrounding its form. The cadaver had clearly defined porcine features, a snout, hooves, and thick black hair all over its body. But its genitals, its lack of tail, and its grotesquely fingered hands were clearly more human than anything else. But my mouth dropped open when I saw what was at its center. Its belly had been torn open, the flesh bearing the rough marks of being ripped, not cut as if with some sharpened, bladed implement. And inside, something gore-soaked glimmered under the bright light of my phone. Silver coins. Its insides were stuffed with silver coins that seemed to overflow from its burst entrails. But I barely had time to reflect on what I was seeing before a squeal from one corner of the barn demanded my attention. I turned, shining my phone's light in that direction, recoiling in horror at what I saw. In a large, elongated stall, several of the same piggish creatures kneeled in a bed of dry hay. They were lined up side by side, jostling for position as they suckled and snuffled at the belly of something considerably and grotesquely larger. It was their mother. A huge, bulbous pig-like creature with flesh as black as coal dust lay on its side in the hay. But again, it was like no animal I'd ever seen before. Its legs were more like that of a spider, sectioned and bony thin, which kicked lazily every so often as its young suckled away. But its eyes, my God, its eyes. There were many, far, far too many. Larger and smaller beads of obsidian flesh that grew from its molted black ears and extended down to its snout. However, it must have been blind, as it didn't react at all as I shone the light over its body. Its young didn't react either. Through ignorance or obliviousness due to their frenzied feeding, I wasn't sure. But it occurred to me that they may not have been reacting to me being there because they were already used to the presence of people in the barn. These were things that should not be, things that had no right to exist by any natural law. And with that thought in mind, I just reacted. I took the lighter from my pocket and began to spark it, touching the naked flame to as much of the dry, spindly hay as I could manage. Sparks could be heard all around me by the time the interior of the barn became illuminated by the bright orange glow, smoke billowing up into the rafters as I ran back to the hole in the paneling and crawled out into the night. I could hear the muffled squealing grow into a painful screeching as I ran towards my car, not daring to collect any of the items I had left up in the guest bedroom. The sounds coming from the barn were the stuff of nightmares as I climbed into the driver's seat, hearing the choir of wounded shrieks joined by a hammering on the inside of the barn door. The things were trying to break out, trying to escape the flames yet being roasted in the process. At first, as I slid the keys into the ignition, the engine refused to start, and as the figures of the family appeared on the porch, it occurred to me in one horrible moment of realization that they may have sabotaged my car. I twisted the keys over and over again, watching as Sophie's father and brother ran at the barn with pails of water, throwing them uselessly onto the flames before watching as the entire structure was engulfed in the fiery conflagration. Finally, as my engine started up, they turned and began to give chase. I expected them to catch me at any moment, but I watched in my rearview mirror as they began to slow, seeming like they were weakening with each passing second. I remember Sophie's father in particular falling into the dirt as his knees seemed to give out completely, a streak of white hair where his natural brown should have been. He was changing. Each of them were, wilting like unwatered flowers before collapsing to the ground. They were aging and dying before my very eyes. The last time I ever laid eyes on my beloved Sophie, as she crawled along the earth in pursuit of me, she looked 100 years old. I drove all night, foot on the gas, until a sliver of blue appeared on the eastern horizon and my fuel gauge ticked dangerously low. And after I pulled into a gas station on the outskirts of Detroit, I got out of my car and almost collapsed against the hood after bursting into loud, ugly tears. Only one other traveler was present, an older man who just pretended he didn't see me before heading into the gas station's small store to pay up. I kept seeing Sophie's face in my mind, the way she used to smile at me when we first met. I couldn't reconcile how she looked in the end, withered, ancient, and angry. The entirety of the past few days seemed like a blur, like the whole thing had been one long, bad dream. I was exhausted, weak from near starvation, but my appetite was evidently in no rush to return. Somehow, I managed to pull myself together, stepping away from my car and smoking another cigarette away from the gas pumps to calm my nerves. Then, I walked back over to my car, pumped a fresh tank of gas into her, then followed the path of the older driver into the gas station to pay my bill. I just felt numb. Maybe I should have been relieved that the nightmare was over, that I'd somehow managed to escape such a hellish place with my life. But it was a little consolation. I'd lost the love of my life, even though it did turn out that she was never really who I thought she was. The clerk behind the counter was some punk chick, tired green eyes looking up at me from underneath the shock of dark purple hair as she nursed a black coffee. Teresa, her name badge said. I had to clear my throat to make myself heard as I slid a 20 across the countertop. I'm number 4. She got up off her stool and began to take my money when I saw she had a small box TV with her, one that showed an oddly familiar landscape. Hey, I said. Hey, turn that up for a second. The clerk shot me a displeased look, but obliged me all the same. The TV showed a newscast, images from a helicopter that circled something that was surrounded by endless cornfields. What is without a doubt a geological phenomenon of almost unprecedented scale here in the United States? The voice from the small speaker crackled. As you can see, Mark, the newly formed sinkhole is hundreds of feet wide, and we're talking about whole football fields here, and no one is quite sure how deep it goes yet. Crazy, huh? The clerk said. It happened just a few hours ago. Hope no one got hurt. No, I replied dully. No one did. Oh yeah? Well, how would you know? But I was already walking out the door, getting ready for the long remainder of the drive back home, where I have no doubt I will spend the rest of my life trying to forget the things I saw and the things I heard, back on that terrible place that pretended to be a farm. Summer on the I-75. Heat shimmers danced over miles upon miles of baking tarmac as temperatures climbed into triple digits. The South Florida sun hung heavy in a cloudless sky, weeks of intense heat leaving scorch marks on the crabgrass at the side of the highway. And in a single pickup with busted air conditioning that sped down a lonely stretch of road, the draft of an open window was the only thing keeping the driver from passing out with heat stroke. He gripped the wheel with palms that were drenched with perspiration. His mouth was dry, his stomach ached with hunger. He'd lost track of the number of hours he'd been awake for back around 50, hardly taken his foot off the gas for most of that, stopping only to fill up at some one-shack mom-and-pop gas pump on a side road. But it wasn't the truck that was about to run out of gas this time. It was him. He was crashing, so hard that he almost didn't notice the little fleck of color appear in his rearview mirror. But when he did, not even the Florida heat could prevent the chill that shot up his spine. It was a Florida Highway Patrol vehicle, and it was gaining on him. The driver took one hand off the steering wheel and reached for the glove compartment. Inside was a loaded .38 revolver, one that he'd hoped he wouldn't have to use. He placed it in his lap, just out of sight of the driver's window, and waited for the state trooper to make his move. Behind him, the trooper kept gaining minimum distance for a minute or two. In the driver's rear view, he's just a silhouette, a dark shape behind the wheel. The driver silently begs him to keep off the lights and sirens. "Don't do it," he thought. "Don't do it. I don't want to make your kids salute a flag-draped coffin, but I will. God help me, I will." It was with a sinking stomach and pounding heartbeat that the driver watched as red and blue flashes illuminated his rear view. He looked down into his lap, at the .38 that would seal his and the state trooper's fate. It didn't have to come to this. None of it did. But still, he began to drift over to the side of the road, ready to slow to a stop, turn off the engine, and lure the state trooper into an ambush. Only the trooper didn't mirror his movements. It didn't tail him to the side of the road. The state trooper simply accelerated and drove straight past him. Yet as he did so, the driver felt no kind of relief, only the need to vomit, for he had not escaped his fate, only delayed it. As not to arouse any suspicion, the driver continued to crawl over the side of the highway, slowing gradually until the truck finally came to a complete stop. The old rusted door handle screeched as he opened the truck's door just enough to empty the yolk yellow lining of his stomach onto the tarmac outside. He wiped his mouth, smearing bile into the knee of his jeans, then reached for the glove compartment again, this time to swap the loaded .38 for a small glass pipe. There was enough half-burned crystal clinging to the filthy glass to make him feel normal again, but as he brought the pipe to his lips and fished around the pocket for a disposable lighter, something on the side of the road caught his eye. It was a young girl, no more than 8 or 9 years old. Her eyes flickered from his face to the meth pipe and back again, but no expression registered on her small, soft features. The driver hesitated, feeling the warm glass slip from between his lips and into a waiting hand. And in an act so foreign that it scared him, he let the pipe drop onto the tarmac before it crunched under the weight of his boot. By the time he'd shut the truck's door and started up the engine, the little girl was gone. He was renewed with adrenaline, but he doubted the jitters would take him any further than the next truck stop. Just a few miles more, then he could let go, eat something, drink something, sleep like the dead. And so, his hands still shaking, he torched the end of a cigarette pursed between his lips, pushed his foot gently onto the acceleration, and carried on down the highway. After driving for another hour or so, a small rest stop came into view. It was nothing more than a small business set up at the side of the road, but it would do for now. The driver could see signs for a liquor store, a bar and grill, but most importantly, a motel. He drove the truck around the back of the motel, just out of sight of the highway. As he got out of his cab, feeling blood returning to vessels long since cut off by the restrictive posture, a lone voice sounded over the hum of the cicadas. "No puedes estacionar aquí." The driver didn't say a word as an elderly Hispanic man approached him, his skin like leather, tanned in the sun. "Eres sordo, okay?" The man spoke again as the driver reached into his pocket. He pulled out a crumpled $10 bill, sliding it into the man's shirt pocket before walking off towards the highway and the bar on the other side. The Hound Dog Bar and Grill was almost empty. Pool balls clacked as they collided, cutting through the low drone of a jukebox that played some Mold Skinnerd song. Cigarette smoke hung thick in the air, mixing with the strong scent of fried food coming from the kitchen in the back. The driver slid his aching body onto a bar stool, setting his eyes on a grubby laminated menu that lay before him. As he tried to read it, the small black lettering began to bleed together, melting and swirling until it made his head throb. He pointed at the first words he'd recognized, sliding the menu over to the bartender as he did so. The bartender nodded before heading off into the kitchen to prepare the driver's order. The food came quickly, bare bones burger and fries. The driver felt like he'd eat twice the amount set down in front of him, but still he ate slowly. Too much too soon would make him sick. He took a sip from the neck of his beer bottle, feeling the cool, bitter liquid gracing his parched throat, but almost spat it out when he looked up at a small box TV set up on a shelf above the bar. The volume on the vintage-looking set was turned down low, but the picture showed a news report, something about an incident up near Jacksonville. The shot changed to some helicopter cam footage of a fire that raged through a tenement building, capturing the moment that a wooden support beam crashed through the second floor. It then showed the face of 3 men that were wanted by police for questioning in relation to the fire. The driver was one of them. He felt nauseous with fear as he slowly turned and scanned the room. Besides himself, there was just the bartender and a handful of patrons, and none were watching the TV. But it didn't bring him any relief because now he was being hunted. The driver finished his food in silence, not once looking up from the cheap tin plate that now swam with grease. He slid back off the bar stool, put a crumpled 20 onto the bar top, and began to walk towards the front entrance. "Hey!" someone called after him. "Hey, you, wait a second." Reluctantly, the driver turned, looking over his shoulder at the bar behind him. It was the bartender, looking back at him with a dead stare. "Don't you want your change?" The driver exhaled a long, slow breath of relief, but couldn't quite bring himself to smile as he shook his head. Soon the warmth of the sun was on his skin again as he shuffled back across the highway towards the motel. He fetched a large black duffel bag from his truck parked out back, then lugged it around to the reception area to rent a room. Inside the small building attached to the motel forecourt was the reception area. The driver walked inside, carrying the heavy duffel bag by the straps. Sat in front of a luminous blue bug zapper was a tired-looking woman with whom he swapped the $15 nightly rate for a room key. He then dragged himself to the flight of stairs to room 22, the duffel held tight in his grip. After locking the room's door behind him, he slid the duffel under the double bed before unhooking the loaded .38 from his waistband and placing under a pillow. It was mid-afternoon by that point, a few hours sleep to recharge his batteries, and he could be back on the road south before sundown. As he lay himself down on the stained white bedspread, he felt as if he might sink into a sleep so deep that he'd never wake up at all. And if he did, it might well be looking down the barrel of a police-issued shotgun, racked and ready to plaster his brains all over the pillow on which he currently rested his head. Worry furrowed his brow for a moment after his eyes closed, before his breathing slowed and his head began to empty of thought. Then, with the hypnotic muted whisper of cicadas outside in his ears, he finally fell asleep. When he opened his eyes again, there was fire. A great roaring furnace burned in front of him, so intensely hot that he smelled the acrid scent of his own singed hair in the air around him. The blaze towered above him, and from deep inside the inferno he could hear a woman scream. At first, it was as quiet as a whisper, but as it grew, the blood-curdling scream faded into a hoarse, grinding wail. But they weren't screams of pain. They weren't the howls of a woman suffering the searing agony of being burned alive. It was grief. She was screaming out of grief. The screams multiplied as hundreds of gaunt, charred faces appeared among the flames before him. He looked down, discovering that his jeans had caught alight. He swatted at the flames, trying to put them out, sweat pouring from his brow as he tried and failed to prevent himself from bursting into flames. But just as he was about to be engulfed, the driver looked up, back into the fire, just in time to see his scorched, peeling arm, black as coal dust, erupt from the flames before its hand wrapped around his throat and squeezed. The driver jolted awake, eyes wide, gasping for breath. He hadn't had a nightmare since he was 11 years old. It was the withdrawals. It had to be. Nothing else could explain how lucid it felt. A cold shower provided relief against the oppressive evening heat. He left the bathroom feeling like a new man, his mind focused, ready to get back on the road again. He dressed himself, hooking the loaded .38 into his waistband again before kneeling on the carpet to fish the heavy black duffel out from under the bed. But as he did so, something felt wrong. It was heavy all right, but not nearly as heavy as it should have been. In a panic, he wrenched open the zippers only to have his worst fears confirmed. What should have been inside the bag, stuffed into individual plastic bags, was just over $20,000 in cash. But that's not what the driver found when he opened up the duffel. Instead, he found plastic bags stuffed with filthy, worn-out children's clothes. Only one of the bags contained any money at all, and it only amounted to a few $100s. Someone had swapped out the cash, and in his hasty escape, he'd neglected to check it was still there. For a few moments, the driver stayed perfectly still, staring into the open duffel in utter disbelief. He found he had forced himself to take a breath, white light creeping into the corner of his vision. All his plans, all his hopes, gone. Without the money, there was no ticket onto a ship leaving the United States, no new life in the Bahamas, nothing. He stuffed his face into a pillow, biting down on the cheap, coarse linen before he let out a guttural, primal scream. Then came the tears, the guilt, the anger. Everything he'd managed to keep inside of him on the road south came spilling out in one ugly torrent. Suddenly, he stood up, pulling the .38 out from his waistband and placing the barrel in his mouth. The steel tasted bitter on his tongue as he angled the muzzle to the roof of his mouth. It would all be so easy just to check out there and then and not have to clean up the mess he'd left behind. But he'd never made a habit of going easy on himself. Always took the hard road, his pa used to say, no matter where it took him. It was that particular thought that made the driver take the revolver from out of his mouth and decide that there had to be another way. The driver shuffled over to the motel room's windows and hooked a finger into the blinds. Outside, the Hound Dog Bar and Grill was considerably busier than it had been earlier. A dozen or so Harley-Davidson motorcycles were parked up outside, with the drunks almost as loud as the music. A thought flashed through the driver's mind. A busy bar would have a whole lot of cash on hand come closing time. All he had to do was walk over, spend a few hours nursing a few beers, then hit the manager's office come closing. His mind was made up. He stuffed what money he had left into the pocket of his jeans, left his motel room, and headed back across the highway. What had only a few hours ago been a sleepy roadside burger joint was now swarming with scum and villainy. 1%er motorcycle clubs held court around small tables overflowing with empty beer bottles and shot glasses. Small-time dealers barely concealed nickel and dime deals in front of bartenders that had long since ceased trying to prevent them. All the while, trailer park pimps arranged back alley meets between oxy, dumb hookers and their johns. The driver waded through the crowd until he found himself a spot at the bar. He ordered a beer, waited, and watched. Over the course of the next few hours, the driver watched as the crowds grew more and more intoxicated, laughing and bickering among themselves, sharing drinks and stories with an almost constant stream of people going to and from the bathrooms. At one point, something caught his eye from across the room. A small figure stood alone in a corner of the bar, holding something in their hand. It was a child, the same little girl we'd seen on the highway. No one was paying any attention to her, but it didn't surprise the driver that there were parents neglectful enough to leave their kid alone in a late-night dive. Only, that wasn't what was so odd. It wasn't so much the beer-swilling patrons weren't paying attention to her. It was as if though they couldn't see her at all. People walked right past her, drinks in hand, without giving her so much as a look. It was then the driver saw what was in her hand. It was a teddy bear. It was burned to a crisp. Suddenly, a huge leather-clad biker blocked his view of the girl for a moment, and by the time he had moved, she was gone. Around 2 in the morning, the drunks began to slowly file out into waiting taxis. The driver kept his head down, biding his time until resistance would be minimal. Half the patrons would be carrying, and it was likely the main office had a piece tucked away somewhere. If he was going to strike, it had to be surgical. When there was only a handful struggling to stand, the lone security guard began to issue a 10-minute drink-up warning. The driver nodded lazily but compliantly when it was his turn to be told, watching as yet more of the patrons finished their drinks and stumbled out of the front doors. Slowly, once the security guard's back was turned, the driver began to reach for his waistband. But as his right hand slipped under his filthy t-shirt and his finger began to curl around the .38's grip, he heard a voice behind him. "You don't want to do that, my friend." A hand shot out, gripping the arm that reached for the .38. "No one has to die here tonight." The driver turned with fury in his eyes, trying to wrestle out the stranger's grip, but he was strong, very strong. "You can try it, friend, but that security guard there will put 2 or 3 in you before you even hit the ground. He's an off-duty cop, mean as hell, too." The driver stopped struggling and slowly took his hand away from the revolver. He was shaking from the adrenaline, furious at the unwelcome intervention of the stranger, but he wasn't stupid. The stranger let go of his wrist, smiling before he spoke. "If it's money you need, I can get you money. 100,000 for just a day's work." The stranger had the driver's ear. "Hey, I told you, get out of here, we're closed." The bouncer barked in their direction. "Me and my friend here were just leaving," the stranger said, nodding in the driver's direction. "Walk with me, friend. We have some business to discuss." The driver followed the stranger out of the bar, parking lot gravel crunching underneath their boots until they reached a black 4-seater pickup. It was only out in the fluorescent light of the bar's parking lot that the driver could get a good look at him. He was a huge African-American, light-skinned with blue-green eyes. He wore practical, dark-colored clothing, having a vague air of the military about him. The stranger climbed into the cab of his truck, inviting the driver around to the passenger side. "What's your name, friend?" the stranger asked. "Cole." The driver croaked. It was the first time he'd spoken in days. "Nice to meet you, Cole. I'm Reeves," the stranger replied, offering the driver a hand to shake. "You spend much time outdoors, Cole?" Sure. When I was a kid," he replied. "Why?" "My employers they'll pay handsomely if I can locate a certain collector's item down in the Everglades," Reeves replied. "What kind of collector's item?" "Something extremely valuable, my friend. Something not just anyone would be willing or able to locate." What makes you think I can?" Cole asked skeptically. "Your whole life, you've been looking for something in a place you'll never find it. Put to the right task, I think you'll be able to help me find just about anything." "You don't know dick about me," he spat back. "I know a lot more than you think, friend." Reeves' reply came with a wry smile. "If you got something you want to tell me, asshole, do it now." Cole shifted in the passenger seat, his whole demeanor now one of confrontation. "I'm not a cop, if that's what you're thinking." Reeves grinned. "Who the hell are you?" "Your last, best hope." The smile left Reeves' face as a serious look entered his eyes. Cole sighed. The guy was right. Without his help, he could be locked up in the county jail within 48 hours. Accept it, and he might just make it to the Bahamas. "All right, I'm down," he finally said.
Just tell me exactly what we're getting into. Well, forgive me if I'm not forthcoming with all the details. Wouldn't want you getting cold feet, Reeves began. But the long and the short of it is that we're headed down to Everglades City to hook up with the rest of the team, and then we head off into the swamps. The rest? Cole asked, feeling the overdue exhaustion setting in once again. Nothing you need to concern yourself with just yet, Reeves replied. Now, you got a vehicle you want to follow me down in. Anything in that motel room you need to pick up? How did you know? It's my job to know things, friend. Now, grab what you need so we can get going. Cole took a moment to think. There was nothing in the motel room that belonged to him, and it was only a matter of time before the cops put an APB on the truck he'd borrowed. No, I don't need nothing. Let's go. Well, all right then, Reeves replied, turning the truck's key and gunning the engine. You better get some sleep, though. You look a little worse for the wear. But Cole's eyes were already half closed, and as Reeves' trucks began to disappear on that long, dark stretch of the I-75, he drifted off into another deep sleep. The next time Cole opened his eyes, a sliver of blue was creeping onto the eastern horizon. He considered closing them again for the remainder of the journey, but felt his cravings creeping back. There would be no more sleep that morning. Mind if I smoke a cigarette? Sure. Just open the window, Reeves answered, eyes still glued to the road ahead. Cole relished the blast of cool morning air that hit his face as he rolled down the passenger window. He'd always appreciated that early morning tranquility. It was about as calm as Florida ever got. The truck turned off the highway just as Cole's cigarette burned down to the filter, where he once again found himself in the parking lot of an old rundown motel. He flicked the remnants out of the open window before rolling it up again, following Reeves out of the truck and over to one of the rooms. There, Reeves gently tapped a knuckle against the grubby glass window. Cole heard movement on the other side. When the door to the motel room opened, a long-haired man with a wild beard peered out for a moment before opening it fully. Well, it's about time you showed up. The hell kept you? I had to find the right one, Reeves replied, nodding his head in Cole's direction. This guy? Really? The bearded man asked with an insulting snort of laughter. You gotta be kidding me. But when the look in Reeves' eyes assured him he was not, the bearded man reluctantly stepped out of the doorframe, allowing them entry, but eyeballing Cole as they did so. Inside the room, Cole understood why the curtains were drawn. It was a veritable arsenal of weaponry and equipment, with firearms, tactical clothing, and maps laying out on every available surface. In one corner sat another man, well-groomed and clean-shaven, in stark contrast to the one who'd answered the door. Ah, so you're the guy, huh? He said to Cole as he looked up from cleaning what appeared to be an AR-15 variant. Good to meet you. I'm Fievel, and that there is Norris. Don't mind his mood, he's not really a morning person. Cole turned, raising a hand in greeting, only then noticing that the bearded man's left arm was missing up to the elbow, the rest of his skin being a patchwork of scars and rough tattoos. Norris sent little more than a nod back Cole's way. So, what's your thing? Fievel asked. My thing? The question confused Cole at first. Yeah, like your specialty. I'm here to offer my medical expertise while Norris there is just about the best gator trapper in the state of Florida. I'm just curious what you bring to the table. Is that what you're doing here? Gator trapping? Cole asked. The gators will be the least of our worries, Reeves interjected with a shake of his head. So wait a second. Do you two know exactly what this guy is getting us into here?
Cole asked, feeling the frustration boil inside of him, heated by the fire of his cravings.
I suppose now is as good a time as any to tell you,
Reeves said, leaning forward in the seat.
What you're looking for belongs to something that lives in the glades. Something we'll have to hunt and kill before we can retrieve it.
Easy. I've been hunting swamp critters since I was a boy.
Norris chuckled.
No, not easy,
Reeves replied.
This thing is dangerous, real dangerous, and we won't have any easy time finding it because it doesn't want to be found. We can track it, hunt it, and kill it, just like any other animal. But it is not like any other animal. You need to understand that.
I knew that there was something you weren't telling us about this,
Norris muttered.
You're gonna have us out there looking for a goddamn skunk ape or some crap.
There are questions you'll have that I simply don't have the answers to. I can only tell you what I know,
Reeves continued.
But I can assure you, what we're looking for is very real, and I can promise you, it might well find us long before we find it.
For a moment, there were no replies, no questions. Each man was rendered silent by Reeves' statement. To Cole, it almost sounded like the plot of a poorly written horror story, but something in Reeves' eyes had him believing every word. He had to be talking about a rare Florida panther, maybe an albino gator or something. But as long as he was good for the money, Cole didn't really care.
$100K, right?
Fievel finally asked.
Cash on delivery? Wired to your bank account upon delivery of the asset.
Reeves nodded.
All right,
Norris said.
When are we leaving?
The four men piled themselves and their equipment into Reeves' truck as the morning air began to warm. Cole found himself sat next to the shifty-looking medical professor, who seemed like he'd be more at home in an air-conditioned office space than out in the Everglades. Staring out the window, Cole felt himself begin to shake as meth cravings began in earnest. Even with the truck's air conditioning on full blast, he felt his armpits become clammy with cold sweat. He turned, noticing Fievel staring curiously in his direction.
What?
Cole snapped. But Fievel could tell something was wrong. That much was obvious. A few minutes later, Fievel reached for his backpack in the footwell in front of him, fishing around inside it before pulling out a small bottle of pills.
Here, take one,
he said softly.
It'll help. Help with what?
Cole's response was confrontational, but it was limp. He reached for the bottle, cracked the lid, and swallowed one dry.
Keep them,
Fievel added.
You're gonna need them.
It took a half hour for Cole to feel his withdrawal symptoms subside somewhat, just in time for Reeves to turn the truck off the highway and down a dirt road.
Almost there,
he said ominously, the shadows of trees passing over the truck. Cole was about to ask where there was, but he didn't have to wait for an answer. The greenery either side of the road disappeared as the dirt road birthed into a large, wide-open space. Before them was a huge complex of abandoned buildings.
I know this place,
Fievel spoke up.
This is the port of the Islands Hotel.
Ain't that way back near Naples?
Norris asked with confusion.
Nah, that's the resort. This is the hotel. Not nearly as nice and considerably more cursed.
Cursed? Cole asked.
Yep. No matter who bought this place or how much money they poured into it, it always ended up getting shut down,
Fievel explained.
Back when it was open, they'd have guests complaining about missing doorknobs and broken locks, bug-infested bedding, radios that'd switch on by themselves, or black water coming out of the faucets. All kinds of creepy shit.
And you think this is where you're gonna find what you're looking for?
Norris asked Reeves.
I doubted it'd come out this close to civilization, he replied. We'll have to walk a few hours into the glades before we pick up any trail, but this is a safe enough place to park up and start looking.
Reeves parked the truck before the team took their equipment from the truck bed. Cole looked on in fascination as the one-armed Norris pulled a camouflage pack from the truck, opened it, and pulled out a curiously modified prosthetic arm. He'd seen prosthetics with hook attachments, but not one as large and sharp as his, and none with a row of shotgun shells attached to the forearm. Norris then produced a sawn-off pump-action shotgun that had a large steel ring screwed into the foregrip. Suddenly it made sense. Cole watched in amazement as Norris demonstrated how he could load, rack, and fire the shotgun as fast as any able-bodied man. That, along with his collection of deadly bang sticks and the huge hunting knife clipped to his belt, made the man a force to be reckoned with. Fievel, on the other hand, was much more conventionally intimidating. Along with his AR variant and an array of tactical equipment clinging to his back webbing, he carried a rucksack stuffed with all manner of tourniquets, painkillers, antidotes, and anti-inflammatory drugs. He looked slick, more combat medic than general practitioner. The only thing that stood out about him was the .45 he kept in his chest holster.
Nice pistol. What is that? The Grim Reaper or something?
Norris asked, pointing at the intricate gold leaf of a skeletal figure carved into the grip.
Something like that. It was a gift from a patient of mine, he replied. Said it would bring me luck.
But Cole knew it wasn't the Grim Reaper that was carved into the pistol's ebony grip. It was Santa Muerte, the female personification of death from Mexican folklore. Suddenly, the good doctor didn't quite seem so out of place anymore. About the same time that Reeves was pulling a rustic-looking bolt-action hunting rifle out of his truck bed, Cole realized he had nothing but his .38 revolver to arm himself with.
Reeves, can I talk to you for a minute?
He asked quietly.
Sure, friend. What's on your mind?
Oh, you guys got rifles and stuff, but all I got is this crummy .38.
He said, taking it from his waistband and presenting it to Reeves.
I mean, it don't even shoot straight when it even fires at all.
Don't worry, friend. I packed something extra, just for you.
Reeves reached into the truck bed once again and pulled out the last weapon that Cole expected to see. The old breech-loading rifle that Reeves held out before him by a scuffed leather strap had to be at least 150 years old. It was huge, almost double the length of Fievel's slick-looking AR variant, not to mention twice as heavy.
You gotta be kidding me,
Cole said.
When it's time to use it, you'll understand.
A skeptical Cole took the rifle from Reeves' hands and looked it over. It looked like something right out of a Civil War movie.
What in the world?
Norris's voice was full of curiosity.
Is that a Sharps rifle? Jesus, that thing should be in a goddamn museum. The hell you even find this thing?
He asked Reeves.
It belonged to my grandmother, Reeves replies. Brought it over with her from Haiti. Quite the woman, too. She was a mambo, a voodoo priestess.
What'd she shoot with it? The spirits of the recently departed? Fievel asked with a mocking grin.
Actually, she used that thing to kill old Pete.
Old Pete? You mean that guy with the concrete skull?
Asked Norris.
I thought that was just a made-up story.
Henry Peterson was as real as you and me, my friend,
Reeves replied with a knowing smile.
And he was not the lovable oaf that the tales make him out to be. Not towards the end, anyway.
And you expect us to believe your sweet old grandma was the one that put him down? Fievel asked, his words dripping with disbelief.
She put a bullet through his heart. Told me she bounced one right off his skull before she did.
And why the hell would your grandma ever need to kill that sweet old thick-skulled railroad worker? Because like I said, he wasn't so sweet towards the end. What made old Pete's bones so strong was only the beginning of what happened to him.
And what happened to him?
Norris asked. Old Pete was such a dummy before his bones grew. But the stronger they got, the less Pete found himself able to think straight. Until by the time the bone was forcing its way through the flesh of his forehead, Pete was barely human at all. Fivel's mocking skepticism wasn't nearly as loud after Reeves spoke, and a creeping chill had descended on the entire group. So, if you're telling me your grandma used that thing to kill old Pete, and old Pete who wasn't human when she did, just what kind of animal are we looking for out there in the swamps? No more questions. Not now. We're burning daylight. Reeves replied, shouldering a heavy-looking rucksack stuffed with gear. First we move through the hotel, then we take off into the Everglades. Let's get going. The ruins of the port of the island's hotel were like a vision of some post-apocalyptic future. Vines and weeds grew wildly over crumbling brickwork. Walls were plastered with spray paint graffiti, some of which was extremely unnerving to the group as they wandered through long abandoned hallways. The Everglades are Dead was sprayed in blood-red paint over a detailed map of the surrounding swampland. I Was Not Crazy was smeared on the adjacent wall, punctuated by a single handprint. The group filed out of the ruined hotel lobby, stepping over crumbling bricks until there was nothing but a sea of greenery before them. The lushness of the Everglades was evidently down to the tiny freshwater streams and tributaries that ran through the area like a network of arteries. And although there was much in the way of solid ground for the group to walk on, most of it was waterlogged, with each step bringing a little more moisture into the boots of each man's feet. Norris took the lead, occasionally turning to Reeves for direction.
Careful where you step now,
he said, using one of the longer back sticks he carried to probe the flooded ground ahead of him.
Lots of holes around here. Wouldn't want your ankles getting bitten by whatever calls them home. Jesus Christ,
Cole hissed as he almost lost his footing to an uneven piece of ground.
The goddamn socks are just about soaked through. Embrace it, brother,
Norris laughed.
Ain't no use trying to stay dry out here. Just keep your eyes out for cottonmouths, and we'll all be fine.
The four men walked for hours, through mile upon mile of sodden ground, soundtracked by the steady rhythmic splashing of boots. It started to dawn on Cole just how big the Everglades really were, and how easy it could be to get lost out there. After a while, sparse pines and wide open spaces had been steadily replaced by dense, humid swampland that was almost impossible to navigate through. By noon, the group was exhausted from their morning's exertion. Their clothes were soaked through with sweat and stinking swamp water, exposed skin inflamed and itching from relentless clouds of mosquitoes. Each had continually applied insect repellent since the start of their journey, but the sweat that seeped from open pores had washed it away almost as quickly as it was applied. There were audible sighs of relief when they began to notice a break in the foliage ahead of them. Cole saw what appeared to be a collection of wooden buildings built in a clearing among the trees.
Thank God,
Fievel groaned. Finally, somewhere to take 5.
I hear you, brother. I got some jerky in my pack that's just crying to be chewed up,
echoed Norris as the group broke through the trees.
What the hell is this place?
Cole asked as he looked around.
I think I can answer that,
Fievel replied, unshouldering his pack and rummaging through one of the pouches until he pulled out a laminated map. He studied the sheet for a few moments as the others eyed the collection of dank structures with curiosity. The place was as silent as the grave, a cluster of rotten wooden structures that appeared untouched in over a century.
That's weird,
he remarked.
I can't find this place on the map.
Let's just look around, Reeves said. see what we can find.
The group slowly walked among the buildings, studying the unmarked settlement with increasing suspicion. The further Cole walked, the more he noticed something peculiar about his surroundings. It appeared that one day, for some reason, life had suddenly just stopped. There were no boarded-up windows, nothing to indicate that the settlement's occupants had gradually migrated north. It looked like a place frozen in time.
Damn it,
Fievel growled.
I gotta take a leak. I'll catch up with you guys. Maybe he can find himself one of those old outhouse things,
Norris remarked.
Yeah, this place is old as hell,
Cole added, before something caught his attention on the outer wall of one of the buildings. It was a small black circle, one that seemed to be moving, warping and revolving on the spot. Then he remembered the pills Fievel had given him, how they suppressed his withdrawal symptoms, and immediately fished the bottle from his pocket before swallowing one dry. Yet as his eyes remained glued to the strange black circle, he realized that it was no hallucination. Cole took a few steps towards the wall but couldn't quite believe what he was looking at. They were centipedes, maybe 4 or 5 of them grouped tightly and all creeping together in a perfect circle. He'd never seen insects act like that before. Ants, maybe, but not centipedes. Cole turned back toward Norris and Reeves to get their attention, but the pair were distracted. Their attentions firmly focused on a small shack that had been hidden from view by a larger structure on their approach. It has a silvery sheen to it, one that was confusing to the eye at first, but Cole soon realized what it was. It was spiderwebs. Every single inch of that small wooden shack was covered in spiderwebs. Cole's eyes began to detect little flickers of movement among the cobwebs as the 8-legged creators of the webbed mass swarmed over their handiwork. That's when something else caught Reeves' attention. He edged off toward one of the other buildings, pushing open the old rickety door with the barrel of his hunting rifle. The door groaned on its hinges as it swung open, and Cole's jaw dropped when he saw what was inside. There were bones everywhere. Decayed corpses were strewn about the floor, some with their skeletal fingers still curled around the barrel of a musket or the handle of a knife. There had been a massacre here, long ago, and it had been bloody. In one corner there appeared to be a wasp's nest, and much like the webbed tapestry nearby, it was gigantic, swallowing up an entire corner of the lower floor. Cole had seen plenty of wasp nests tucked away in the upper corners of dusty garages, but this one was terrifyingly huge. Yet the stab of fear only pierced Cole's guts when he saw something protruding from the peak of the papery hive. It was the top of a human skull. Empty eye sockets just visible over the mass of wooden pulp. A human being that had been cocooned in that thing. But by what? Cole dared not imagine. "Go get Fievel," Reeves hissed at Norris, who quickly nodded and rushed to retrieve him.
Hey,
Cole grabbed Reeves by the arm as Norris went out of sight.
just where the hell have you brought us, huh?
"I don't know, my friend," he replied. "But I know we're getting closer." He pulled his arm out of Cole's grip and nodded toward the old Sharps rifle that hung on Cole's shoulder by the strap. "Have that thing at the ready." Cole did as he was told, just as the dead silence was interrupted by an anxious cry.
Fievel?
It was Norris.
Fievel, where the hell are you at?
They rushed off to the direction of the shouts, where they found Norris alone and beginning to panic. He made to call out again, but Reeves got to him first.
"Shh, keep your voice down,"
he hissed.
"You can't have gone far."
But he had. Norris tracked Fievel's boot prints for about 50 or 60 yards into the trees before they seemed to disappear entirely. He peered into the dirt, then up at the treetops, a look of confusion wrinkling his face.
"Talk to me, Norris,"
Reeves said.
It doesn't make sense. The tracks just end. It's like he up and climbed a tree or something,"
the trapper replied. He didn't, Cole interjected impatiently. So, where is he?
I don't see you putting forward any theories, city boy,
Norris growled in reply.
He probably turned back,
Cole snapped.
And after running into this goddamn creep show, I don't think I blame him.
Enough, Reeves commanded. Regardless of where or why he'd gone, we got no choice but to keep moving. Come on, let's move. The three remaining men walked through the rest of the old abandoned settlement, past the rotting wooden carcasses that doubtless contained further unspeakable horrors. Just as they reached the tree line, Cole saw a figure in his peripheral vision, his head turning in hope of seeing Fievel appear to soothe their fears. Only, it wasn't Fievel. It was the little girl. The little girl from the road. The little girl from the bar, who held the burned teddy bear in her hand. But this time, when the little girl turned toward him, Cole could see it wasn't just the teddy that was burned. It was her, too. One side of her tiny, delicate body was charred to a crisp, her blackened skin cracked and weeping with bubbling pus. On her forearm, the scorching was so complete that only a blackened strip of bone remained. The teddy bear she'd held turned to ashes. She looked at Cole with her one good eye, and with lips that split as they stretched and curled, she smiled at him. As the day dragged on, Cole, Norris, and Reeves pushed deeper and deeper into the heart of the swamp. Each sweat-drenched mile sapped their stamina, each footfall sending agony through blistered heels and toes. Not only was the muddy ground increasingly unstable and uneven, the trees had become so dense in places that it'd be easier to slip through prison bars. They were a feast for the mosquitoes as they slipped and stumbled through thick, stinking mud patches and tangled roots. Worse still, what had once been lush, green, and full of life had now taken on a sickly air of decay, disease, and death. Healthy greens had been replaced by rotten browns and grays. Most of the wildlife had deserted the place, all except the insects. Suddenly the group found themselves confronted with a waterway, one that seemed to cut a path through the increasingly impassable terrain. The choice was obvious, but it didn't make it any easier. Into the water, Reeves ordered.
Ugh, Cole sighed. Just give me a minute.
He unshouldered his rucksack, leaning against a tree as he fished around for a bottle of water. Just as he unscrewed the cap, he noticed Reeves and Norris staring at the tree trunk behind him.
What?
He asked, but he didn't wait for an answer, turning on the spot to see a mass of black and orange working its way down the tree trunk towards him. Cole watched in a kind of terrified fascination as the tip of the writhing mass began to take on a new shape.
Fire ants.
The fear was evident in Norris's voice.
Get away from that tree.
Cole didn't hesitate. He darted away as the swarm of insects began to form a living tendril of crawling ants. First one, then two, then another, until it was horrifyingly clear to all what was happening. The swarm of fire ants was forming the distinct shape of a clawed hand, one which reached out from the tree trunk in the direction of Cole.
Into the water now,
Reeves barked, as the frenzied horde of fire ants fell from the tree trunk, spread out and began to crawl across the mud-soaked floor towards them. Cole hurtled after Reeves and Norris into the knee-deep water, where it would be impossible for the ants to follow. But they were far from safe. The three men waded through the water as fast as they could, away from the legion of fire ants which poured into the water after them in a last, suicidal gasp to catch them. But the further they advanced, the deeper the water became, until before long it was up to their chests. As Cole struggled through the water, thighs burning from exertion, he felt something moving beneath the water's surface, occasionally grazing his legs.
Something's wrong with the bugs here,
Reeves panted.
Yeah, no shit there's something wrong with the bugs, numbnuts,
Norris seethed.
What if it affects the leeches too?
Cole asked, thinking out loud, then
began to wince and kick his legs whenever he felt something move against them.
"Don't splash around so much. You'll attract..."
Norris began, but he was silenced by something gently breaking the surface of the water just a few feet away. Heads turned to see a pair of obsidian black eyes staring at them from beneath dark, leathery ridges. It was an alligator. It was huge, and it was coming right at them.
"Easy. Easy now,"
Norris muttered, slowly edging away from the gator as he took one of the bang sticks off his back.
"Don't try and run."
Reeves and Cole began to mirror his movements, each small step taking them further toward the water's edge. Cole watched as Norris set about carefully edging the business end of the bang stick towards the gator's head. It let out a low reptilian growl and snapped the long black pole out of Norris's hand before he had a chance to pull the trigger. The gator disappeared under the muddy water along with the bang stick, then re-emerged just seconds later, even closer to Norris than before. Reeves shouldered his rifle, aiming it at the direction of the approaching gator, but his scope was dark. The shot was blocked by the retreating Norris.
"Get out of the way,"
Reeves hissed. But Norris didn't move. He was locked into the motion of pulling another bang stick from his back, readying himself for the gator to strike. Reeves couldn't find a shot, but Cole could, and he quickly set out cocking the antique firing mechanism of the Sharps rifle in order to do so. Yet as the old rifle made a loud, metallic click, Reeves' head spun in Cole's direction.
"No!"
he roared. The gator spooked, rearing up in the water with its jaws agape in a violent bid to drag Norris under the water with it. There it would drown him before jagged teeth would rip soft flesh from bone. But as it tried, the end of a bang stick was thrust against the roof of its mouth, and a loud crack sent the gator's brains flying out the back of its skull. It thrashed for a moment, blood and brain matter seeping from the open wound before sinking to the bottom of the swamp.
"No! No! What the hell do you mean, no? I almost died there, you son of a bitch, and you're telling him no when he has a goddamn shot?"
Norris kept his voice low, but his words seethed with fury.
"We need to preserve the ammunition in that rifle, my friend. Our task is impossible without it." "I don't give a good goddamn about your task. Gator already took one of my arms. I'm not letting one take my life, too. Now just how many guys are you willing to lose out here?" "You need to understand. That rifle is..." "I'm done trying to understand,"
Norris interrupted, rage boiling in his eyes.
"If I die out here, you make sure my wife and kids get my share. Every goddamn cent, you hear me?"
I hear you. You can help us find what we're here for, and they'll get every last cent. You have my word on that."
"Goddamn right. Taking us all here. Goddamn biblical crap going on."
Guys. Cole interrupted, pointing over to something lying among the trees.
"Isn't that..."
Nestled in the mud under the bough of a cypress tree was a large black rucksack.
"That's Fivel's pack,"
Norris said.
"Jesus, he must have come this way."
Can you make out which direction he went? Reeves asked.
"I mean, I think so. There's a track here, but ain't no boot prints. Not that I can make out anyway."
Norris remarked as he studied the ground ahead of them.
"If this is him, he had to be crawling or something.
If he's hurt, we gotta go after him," Cole added, sticking behind Norris as he followed the tracks through the mud. Reeves watched as the hope of finding Fivel alive revitalized his exhausted companions, but he could not share that hope, and he envied them for it, for he knew that the worst was yet to come. After a few hundred yards, the tracks simply disappeared, and the three men were left standing among the trees, searching for any signs of their missing comrade. "Look, through the trees," Reeves said, gesturing to something ahead of them. At first, Cole was unable to make out what he had seen, but as the group advanced through the trees, he began to make out an opening in the earth before them. Swarms of insects were crawling all over the edges of the rocky tunnel, squirming through the mud beneath what was unmistakably Fivel's assault rifle. Reeves flashed a look at the others before he unshouldered his backpack. It was dripping wet from wading through the swamp waters, and Cole couldn't imagine what he could possibly want from it. But when he saw it, the implications made him sick to his stomach. Reeves held a bundle of bright red tubes in his hand.
Road flares. Waterproof,
he said.
No way,
Cole said.
no goddamn way. You nearly got us killed taking us into the water, and now you want to take us down there? Are you insane?
Reeves just smirked.
You can stay up here if you want, but you don't want to be alone out here, do you, friend? If he's alive, we gotta get him out of there,
Norris said.
Now give me one of those goddamn things. We're going in.
Slowly and steadily, the three men headed down into the earth. Cole was initially confused as to why such an underground passage wasn't flooded, just like the rest of the glades. But the dense indigenous rock that made up the tunnel's walls explained the absence of water. It was only when Reeves lit one of the waterproof road flares that he saw just how deep the tunnel went. It was so long that the fizzling spark of the road flare glowing into life seemed to echo down the tunnel for hundreds of meters. Every surface seemed to pulse and writhe in the smoky red glow. That, along with the crunching of chitin shells beneath Cole's sodden boots, made him realize that this was because every visible surface was covered in insects.
Follow me. Stay close.
Reeves' whispered echoed down the infested passageway. As they walked, Cole had to bat away insects that fell from the roof of the tunnel and landed in his hair. They made his skin crawl, but the will to rescue Fievel spurred him on. It could have been him trapped down here in the dark. It could have been any of them. The money barely seemed to matter by that point. After a few more minutes of revolting slog through the deep, dark tunnel, the cramped passageway opened out into a huge open space which took on the flare's red glow as they entered. It was huge, ancient, but far from empty. All around the cave, time-worn furniture was placed in a very deliberate fashion. There were old wooden bed frames, tables, chairs, even wardrobes, not to mention a plentiful collection of what appeared to be old steel lockboxes.
What the hell?
Cole whispered, but no one had an answer for him. It was then that Cole noticed a huge wooden board leaning against one of the wardrobes. Painted in extravagant but faded lettering was one word: Florida Blanca. But Cole's eyes were quickly drawn to something else, something on the wall not far from where the wooden panel stood. It seemed familiar to him, but in the faint red glow of the road flare, he was unable to figure out why. Then it struck him. It was the same pulpy substance that they'd found back in the settlement. Only this time, he recognized the head which protruded from the top. It was Fievel's.
Jesus Christ! Get him out of there!
Norris cried, rushing over to the cocoon and tearing away the section that covered Fievel's face. When he ripped it away, Cole recoiled in horror at what was underneath. Fievel was alive, but barely. His skin was pale and clammy. Beads of sweat clung to his brow while his hair seemed to be coming out in patches.
Fievel, buddy, what the hell happened to you?
Norris yelled. But all Fievel could manage was a weak groan as the men commenced to strip the warm, moist pulp from around his body.
We're gonna get you out of here, man. I promise. It's okay. Everything's gonna be okay now.
Cole added, but he knew it was a lie the moment the words touched his tongue. Fievel was barely conscious, wheezing and struggling for breath. At last, Reeves had seemed to pull away enough of the cocoon to reveal Fievel's right arm, stuck in place by the grotesquely sticky substance. He took hold of it, preparing to wrench it free when Fievel finally spoke. At first, it was just a whisper, so faint it was impossible for any of the men to make out.
Please,
he stammered.
Shoot me. Don't talk like that, man. We're gonna get you out of here, into the hospital in no time.
Norris insisted. Reeves passed the flare to Cole, instructing him to hold it above his head to illuminate their grisly work.
Don't yank it. Gradually pull it free. We'll break the bone otherwise,
Reeves said to Norris.
Ready? 3, 2, 1.
They pulled, and Fievel's arm came free from the sticky pulp of the cocoon, but it came alone. His arm had snapped right at the elbow. But instead of fresh blood flowing from the open wound, maggots, thick and wriggling, seeped from the exposed rotten flesh and fell to the infested ground below. Fievel yelped pathetically, his eyes rolling in their sockets as more of the same squirming maggots began to crawl out from his nostrils. Cole watched as one of his eyelids wriggled and pulsed for a moment before bursting open with the force of a thick black beetle's pincer-like mouthparts. The men were repulsed, dumbstruck and terrified by the sight of their companion's body falling apart before their eyes. But the horror paled in comparison to which they felt when they realized that they were no longer alone. Across the cave, bathed in the flickering red light of the road flare, stood a dark figure. The men froze for a moment as they stared him down, not daring to make a sound as the figure stood statue still just feet away from them. Cole couldn't see the man's face, only the black silhouette across the cave, but there was something deeply unnatural about his posture, something inhuman.
Cole,
Reeves whispered.
The rifle.
He could barely find the will to move, but as he did, Cole began to slowly unshoulder the almost 200-year-old weapon. The second he did, the figure's head flickered in his direction with the same lightning-quick speed of a housefly, twitching, buzzing as it did so. Yet as soon as Cole began to bring the old rifle's sights down towards it, the figure seemed to crumble before his very eyes. The thing's entire body seemed to disintegrate into the tiniest of pieces, melting into the insect-infested floor around it, becoming one with the writhing, pulsing mass of insect life that lined every possible surface. Reeves sparked another flare, tossing it into the center of the cave to provide additional light. The thing was moving, surging among the insects that its very form seemed to consist of. Norris went into a panic, cocking his stubby shotgun over and over again with his prosthetic arm as he pumped buckshot into the swarming masses.
Be ready, Cole,
Reeves shouted over the hissing and scuttling of insects.
When the time comes, be ready.
But he could never be ready, not really. And when the time came, he wasn't. Suddenly a patch among the swarm of bugs began to swell, and in what was an eruption of legs and wings and mandibles, the figure had returned. Only this time it was directly behind Norris. Reeves barked a warning, but Norris simply couldn't match the figure's horrifying speed. He spun around with his shotgun, only to be greeted by a torrent of six-legged creatures as the figure crashed over him like a wave. The sound of Norris's screams stretched the men's sanity to its limits. He screeched and choked as millions of tiny biting creatures forced their way into his mouth. They swarmed into his ear canals, tore their way through his fingernails. Anywhere they could, they ripped and tore their way inside of his body. Blood poured from Norris's eyes as his body began to swell with the invading horde of bugs.
Oh God!
Cole squeaked, the rifle shaking in his grip as he lost track of where the swarm ended and where Norris began. It was through the sights of the old Sharp's rifle that Cole watched as Norris's ravaged body began to heave before finally bursting in a gory shower of organ meat and flesh. By the time Cole had wiped the mess from his eyes, the figure was gone. But something else had joined them now, and it was sitting up on one of the old bed frames in a corner of the cave. It was the little burned girl, and although she didn't make a sound, Cole could see from the look on her face that she was laughing. This time her entire body was completely scorched. Empty eye sockets dripped with the boiled remnants of her eyeballs, which ran down her cheeks like tears of joy. Her hair had been completely burned away, leaving only the swollen, seared flesh beneath.
Cole!
Reeves screamed, the insects around him in frenzy.
Focus! Aim for the heart, or we're both dead.
The writhing mass of insects screeched in unison as the figure rallied for another attack. When it came, Reeves was the target. The writhing mass of insects screeched in unison as the figure rallied for another attack. When it came, Reeves was the target. Again, the figure rose up out of the swarm at its quarry's rear, enormous arms forming up and reaching out towards Reeves as it prepared to swallow him whole.
Now, Cole! Now!
He roared. Cole raised the rifle, lining the sights up with the figure's chest before something strange began to happen. The rifle felt like it was vibrating in his grip, the stock and barrel growing warmer in his hands. Cole watched as a series of bizarre-looking glyphs began to appear all over the wood and iron of the old sharps, glowing like hellfire in the dim light of the flare. The burning girl was on her feet now, smiling and clapping. The moment he pulled the trigger, Cole was blinded. An intense flash of bright white light sent him stumbling backwards, eyes squeezed shut in agony. When his vision returned, all he saw was flame. The figure before them was burning, and it screamed as it did so. A wretched scream so utterly alien and unholy that Cole had to drop the rifle and shove his fingers in his ears just to block out the sound. The fire burned bright, and it burned quickly as the figure's flailing form crisped and turned to ash before their eyes. When it was over, every insect that remained in the cave lay still, and all that remained of the figure was a pile of smoking powder. Cole watched as Reeves staggered over to the heap, dusted some away, then picked up something that glinted in the dim light. He held it gently, letting it fall into two pieces in his palm, split by the bullet Cole had fired from the old sharps. Reeves smiled, holding it up victoriously for Cole to see. It was crystalline, obsidian black, with a network of arterial chambers running through it like a maze. There were so many questions, but no time to ask them.
Let's get the hell out of here,
he said, before the pair turned and limped out of the cave into the final few hours of daylight. Cole sat in the passenger seat of Reeves' truck as they drove back north, looking out of the window at a setting sun he felt lucky to be seeing again. It was quiet for a long, long time before anyone spoke.
What was that thing?
Cole finally asked. It was all he had thought about since escaping the cave.
That, my friend, is a question I learned to stop asking many years ago. And what you took from it, it's hard or whatever. Who pays you so much to get things like that? You don't need to know, friend. You'll get your money, and that's all that matters.
About that, Cole said,
I need you to do something for me.
What's that, friend?
You gotta get Norris and 5 shares to their family, right? That's part of the deal.
It is, yes. Compensation will be awarded on their behalf, Reeves confirmed.
I want you to do something with my money too.
And what might that be? Reeves asked.
I did something real bad up near Jacksonville,
Cole began.
There was a fire at my cookhouse. Whole apartment block went up. Some people, they lost their lives. A kid died. A little girl.
Cole took a breath to compose himself.
I want you to find the girl's family. Give her my share.
And where are you gonna go with all your money, friend?
I think I have an idea.
Reeves parked his truck up outside a modern-looking 2-story building just a few miles down the road in Naples.
Thank you for your help back there, friend. I say the same to you,
Cole responded, before unbuckling his seatbelt and climbing out of the truck.
Good luck,
said Reeves, and there was weight behind those words.
Thanks. You too.
Cole shut the truck's door, waved off the man he'd never see again, then started off walking towards the nearby building. As he reached a set of stone stairs that led up to the building's entrance, he saw a figure standing at the top of them. It was the little burned girl, only she wasn't burned anymore. Her hair flowed long and brown, her face a healthy pink, and the teddy bear she held in her hand was pristine as the day it was made. She looked down at Cole as he walked up the steps to meet her and smiled. But this time, Cole found it in him to smile back. "Can I help you, sir?" asked a woman from behind a long wooden countertop. Cole had imagined this moment before, but as he looked down at the woman's starched blue uniform and shining silver badge, he'd never imagined it would bring such relief. "Yes, officer. My name is Cole Byrne, and I'm here to turn myself in." The following is an intelligence report from the People's Republic of China, written by a member of their Ministry of State Security's Cyber Warfare Division. The document was leaked by a hacker group tied to the Taiwanese National Security Bureau and was made available to WikiLeaks in August of 2017. Many thanks to Changi Rogue 92 for the translation, as well as dusting up some of the jargon so that the report is easier to understand. Please be warned. You may find what you're about to read to be deeply disturbing. Colonel Yoon, we believe the U.S. Central Intelligence Agency is engaging in a novel form of cyber defense, one which may prove beneficial if adopted by the People's Republic. It involves what appears to be dummy data servers packed with disinformation, the sole purpose of which are to act as bait for our operatives. Earlier this week, Subdivision Ying Shanhong broke into a CIA server bank based in Reston, Virginia. They managed to download several hundred data files before the breach was detected and the servers wiped. But while our intelligence analysts were working their way through the files in order to find anything of pertinence, they discovered something extremely out of the ordinary. Many of the files appear to belong to an organization referred to only as the Foundation, and there is one you may find of particular interest. It discusses the deaths of 2 domestic black hat hackers who believed they were taking part in a covert recruitment program. At this point, it's been well established that the Cicada 3301 phenomenon was a covert recruitment drive initiated by the Cybersecurity Division, and the 2 deceased hackers seem to have believed that they'd uncovered another program of a similar nature. The data file refers to the program as simply Thanatos_01, and the hackers appear to have believed that the object of the initiative was to track and shut down a migrating direct action virus of the same name. However, unless the corresponding intelligence file is completely disinformation, which is the most logical explanation, Thanatos-01 was not a recruitment tool, nor strictly a computer virus, but rather the world's first piece of lethal, software-borne weaponry. Based on the testimony of the surviving hacker, he and his partner were successful in tracking Thanatos-01 down. The hackers then attempted to both contain the software, then render it inert. But as the survivor explained, this only caused the Thanatos-01 software to begin running on his computer. If what they told their Foundation interrogator is to be believed, it could prove deeply concerning. As the Thanatos-01 virus began to take control of the hacker's computer, the user completely lost control of it. None of the computer's peripherals would respond to input, and suddenly the screen went completely dark. When an image finally returned, the surviving hacker said only an absent black and white image was visible. The survivor does not remember exactly what it looked like, only that it rapidly induced an extremely painful migraine. Their instinctual response was to look away from the screen, but their partner was either unwilling or unable to follow suit. The survivor told his Foundation interrogator that while shielding their eyes from the image, they made their way around the back of their partner's desk in order to unplug the computer, assuming that the virus was in the process of destroying its hardware. But just after disconnecting the computer's power supply, the hacker heard his partner emit what he described in the file as a digital scream. There is no further elaboration on what it sounded like or if there was any coded meaning behind the term. The survivor only references the fact that they found this sound to be deeply upsetting. After hearing this, the survivor actually looked at their partner from over the desk and claims that their face was, and I quote, pixelated. When the Foundation interrogator presses the survivor for further details, they claim to have observed that all their partner's facial features were missing and were instead replaced by nothing but flat, pixelated flesh. The report then goes on to confirm that this was the case, with the Foundation medical team having performed a full autopsy of the deceased hacker. While there was no visible damage to the subject's internal organs, their brain appeared to have been transformed into the same pixelated flesh, and acute brain death was determined to be the actual cause of death. The document ends with an addendum written by someone who refers to themselves as Wendell, who asserts that Foundation agents have been successful in isolating and destroying the so-called Thanatos 01 virus. Wendell then seems to designate the virus with a codename SCP-601001, but it's not clear what the acronym or numbers are specifically referring to, as we're not familiar with any such designation type in any U.S. intelligence agency. Whilst definitely alarming, neither myself nor my direct superior believe this report to be credible. The reference to this Foundation is most likely a code name for the Central Intelligence Agency, and failing this, it could well be an attempt at complex disinformation. A red herring to throw us off the trail of any legitimate valuable intelligence. That being said, it cannot be completely ruled out the document holds some degree of merit. The U.S. has a history of closely guarding its top-secret weapons programs, and disinformation is an effective tool at shrouding such endeavors in darkness. Such was the case with the Roswell incident of 1947. While it may serve to continue our pursuit of information on such a program, we might be in danger of falling into the very trap that is laid out for us. And considering how utterly far-fetched the reports are, doing so would be an extremely high-risk course of action, and the People's Republic cannot risk falling behind in this new age of hybrid warfare. However, I believe there is something to be learned from such a method. If we too fill dummy servers with bogus information reports detailing powerful new weapons programs, we may well be able to waste our enemies' valuable time and resources while putting our own to a better and more effective use. Signed, Captain Chen Zhaodu, MSS Cyber War Division, 2016, May 15th. United States Department of Defense, classified document, access restricted to DV security clearance. Distribution will result in arrest and prosecution under Section 2B of the United States Espionage Act, 1917. The following is an excerpt from an interview between the director and operator, 184967, call sign, Cirque. Interview commencing at 1100 hours, dated 11/09/2018. Good morning, Cirque. How are you feeling today? Outstanding, sir. Ready to begin. Excellent. Now, in your own time, tell us what happened out on Harbor Island. Well, we landed about 4 clicks away from the abandoned properties just before dawn. Our orders were to advance up the beach parallel to Harbor Drive North before locating and detaining any civilians. Should we fail to take samples of the contaminated area, we could interrogate the detainees to yield intelligence on the entity. However, it didn't quite go according to plan. We were pre-warned that they might opt to zealously protect the entity, that it might use them as a kind of meat shield, but it was way worse than we thought. First contacts came almost as soon as we got visual on the abandoned beachfront houses. It's like they knew we were coming, and as soon as they caught on to us, they opened fire. We figured the beach was at least a little better than just advancing straight up Harbor Drive, as it could have turned into a goddamn shooting gallery. But we fared a little better on the beach. Took casualties almost right away, but just a few minutes in, we achieved fire superiority, and as the resistance slackened, we pushed up and started to secure the surrounding houses. And we already knew from drone reconnaissance that the primary area of contamination was the house closest to the water, so we gave it a wide berth until the combatants were pacified. Not a single one of them surrendered peacefully, and we couldn't figure out why until we found one on death's door. They thought it was the second coming, sir, quite literally. And even though the guy was bleeding out, his morale was sky high. He kept saying how we'd never stop it, how it was resurrection of the flesh. I'm pretty sure he dropped some other Bible verses in there too, but I couldn't tell you which. I've never been one to believe in any of that sort of stuff, I'm being honest. I tried to stabilize him so we'd at least have one guy to bring back to HQ for questioning, but he was just so badly shot up that he bled out. All the same. Guy died with a smile on his face. They all did. Like they were convinced that what they were doing was some kind of, I don't know, sacred duty. Once the bodies were properly disposed of and a secure perimeter had been established, First Squad moved on the primary contamination area. Only point of access was a long ladder on the western side of the structure, and once we picked up a bunch of unusual heat signatures coming from the building's interior, we climbed up one by one before stacking up on the main entrance. Taffner was the first guy in, and we heard his reaction over our radios when he saw what was inside. It was warranted. Definitely one of the worst things I've seen while working for the Foundation. Every nook, cranny, and corner of every single room was plastered with these blood-red clusters of fleshy material, each about the size of a human head. They were quite obviously organic in composition, but we didn't figure they were actually conscious until we started shining our flashlights on them. As soon as the brighter lights touched them, they recoiled, tensing up when they hung like they were in pain or something. We didn't think they were in any sort of danger to us, not at first anyway. We thought we'd caught whatever they were in their infancy or something, and we were thankful for it too. It turns out, we were dead wrong. The problem started when Merritt tried to take a tissue sample from one of the clusters. Turned out the tissue had a thick outer layer to it, so there was no way we could scoop a little up or jam a swab into them and get samples. We'd have to either remove one whole or cut into one to get what we needed, so that's exactly what Merritt did. He took out his combat knife and carefully slid the tip into the tissue, and that's when it all started to go wrong. They looked like worms, dozens of long, thin worms that burst from the tissue sac as soon as Merritt cut into it. We watched as they snaked along his glove and up his arm, and somehow they got around his respirator onto his face. He started screaming and shouting, "Get them off me! Get them off me!" But we couldn't. Not without exposing ourselves. So we backed off, weapons at the ready, prepped to put him down if those things made him as aggressive as their meat shields. But luckily for us, it didn't come to that. But unluckily for Merritt, they killed him, and they killed him painfully. He was still writhing around in agony when some of the other flesh sacks burst open and more of those blood-red worm things began to swarm him. It would have been a lot worse for us if Shed hadn't been ready with a cryo thrower, which stopped a whole bunch of them in their tracks before they could make it over to us. No one likes taking casualties, but we thought it would be over after that. Again, we were wrong.
And when the rest of the flesh sacks burst open, hundreds, maybe even thousands of those worm things wriggled their way out. But instead of just heading straight for us like the Frosty friends had done, all of them had slithered into one of the back rooms. Naturally, we followed, with Shed on point with the cryo thrower. But when we turned the corner, it wasn't as simple as just hosing the place down with the thrower. All the worms had formed up, becoming this solid mass of writhing flesh. Jesus Christ, it was huge too. So it wasn't just a case of hitting them all a few hundred at a time. And what's worse, it looked humanoid, like it was mimicking us. Like all those worms all had a collective consciousness that knew they were stronger together. And one by one, it took us out. Starting with Shed, so we couldn't turn the cryo thrower on it. Shed sprayed a section of his torso before he fell, but the frozen layer of flesh just fell off and was replaced by another. In the end, me and Ari just had to throw ourselves off the structure onto the sand below, screaming at Second Squad to torch the place as we landed. If it wasn't for them being ready with the pyro, I wouldn't be here, giving this interview. Both me and Ari owe these guys our lives, sir. They're a credit to the Foundation. After that, we were taken back to HQ on the casualty evacuation choppers, so that's about where my knowledge of the operation ends. I can only apologize for not being able to provide a direct sample of the entity, but I'm also kind of glad we didn't put any of the other teams at risk of contamination. Cirque goes quiet, and the director takes over. No need to be sorry, Cirque. I and the rest of the board believe you took the correct course of action. After all, we take pride in our motto: secure, contain, protect.
Hey friends, thanks for listening. Click that notification bell to be alerted of all future narrations. I release new videos every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. If you get a story, be sure to submit them to my subreddit, r/Let'sReadOfficial, and maybe even hear your story featured on the next video. And if you want to support me even more, grab early access to all future narrations for just $1 a month on Patreon, and maybe even pick up some Let's Read merch on Spreadshirt. And check out the Let's Read podcast, where you can hear all of these stories in big compilations and save huge on data. Located anywhere you listen to podcasts. Links in the description below. Thanks so much, friends, and I'll see you again soon.